Did I say your first name right? Then I actually did a chat GPT thing for your last name, but I struggled with that. So go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit while we wait for everybody else to get on.
For sure. Thanks. My name is Elina Haratzidou. It's a Greek last name, so I understand that it's tricky to pronounce and figure out what the spelling is. I'm from Sweden, KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. I'm finishing my PhD in advanced nuclear fuel manufacturing. And I'm going to talk to you today about nuclear waste disposal, the Swedish concept, as well as communicating to the public about nuclear issues.
Okay. Well, welcome.
What time is it there, Elena?
It's 5 p.m. So it's quite reasonable.
Okay.
So she's working after hours for us. So
it's okay. Yesterday I had a meeting with Boston at 9 p.m. Swedish time. So, you know.
So you can go in late for work tomorrow morning. You have my permission to do that. So.
Yes.
Let's see. What do we need for a quorum, Ed?
Oh, we got 13 voting members.
We got 3 in person and 3 online, so we're 1 short still. Yes.
But Michael, I have several personalities, if that will help. No.
It does the way, unfortunately, the way the law is written specifies the membership without
proxy.
Yeah, and proxy. Okay. But what we do is allow as we're going to take a real vote on it, probably, but
that we're even if we don't have a quorum, we're going to go through the presentations.
Yeah.
So we can't take any actions on, including approving meeting minutes. So.
Yeah. But we had.
Elena, this is John. My grandmother immigrated from Sweden when she was 14 years old into this country from the Gothenburg area. It's where she grew up. So it's good to have a Swede as part of this presentation. Finally.
Yes. That's good to hear. I'm multicultural, actually. I am living in Sweden, have a Swedish citizenship, but I'm Greek-Ukrainian by birth. So it's a triple.
I did see online that your last name is a Greek heritage name. So
yeah,
we're going to go forward. We will take roll, but unless there's somebody hidden on here, we do not have a quorum right now. But we'll start with the roll.
Okay, Chairman Patton.
Here.
Senator Barta.
Here.
Representative Nelson.
I'm here.
Representative Ruby, I didn't see him, and he was planning to be here. State Health Officer Adams.
Sherry's fine. Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Shilkin is not. Rich is here. EEQ Director Glott. Did you acknowledge? Okay. Game and Fish Director Williams. Is Bruce Kreft here? Okay. DOT Director Hinkie, I didn't see him. Reese is here. Department of Water Resources Director Reese Haas is here. Ken Bean going to be online. Donna Hennessy. You should come up to the.
Yes. Yeah. If you're a voting member, you should
Yep.
be sitting at the table.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in at the kids' chairs.
Yep. And Merrick Petrovic, I didn't see Merrick. Okay. So,
Oh, there he is. We do have a quorum now, I believe.
that's what I've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep.
We do have a quorum. I would like to welcome the State Health Officer, Sherry Adams, to the council. She is new. Sherry, why don't you go back and tell us a little bit about yourself so that we, and all your personalities.
And John does know that's true. So I'm Sherry Adams. I am, my full-time job is still the executive officer for Southwestern District Health Unit, which is the 8-county health district out of Dickinson area, and in charge of all 8 counties. When the state health officer position became part-time, and with the legislative change as far as doesn't have to be a doctor, it had to be still a public health professional. So that is how I got the position. I made it through my very first month, and I'm on month 2 now. So that's pretty exciting. I'm very passionate. I work a lot with emergency preparedness and response, as well as working with our National Guard at different levels at the state. I am an environmental health practitioner by background, and I have been in public health for 21 years. Happy to be a part of the new team.
Thank you, Sherry, and welcome to our group. I think the minutes were emailed out to everybody. If you've had a chance to review them, is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I did
John,
notice.
motion to approve.
Oh, we have a,
Mr. Chairman, sorry. I did notice just one minor detail on when it mentions the council members not in attendance, it still says Josh Tigan as the Commerce Director, but that would have been Chris Shilkin as the Commerce Director at the time of that meeting.
we will make that correction, and John, you made the motion to approve? Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I did.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Senator Barta seconded to approve the minutes as corrected. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Aye.
Okay, we'd like to, earlier we did a quick introduction of Lena. And so I would like you to, Lena is calling in from Sweden and is going to give us a presentation on the waste management as they've experienced it and dealt with it. So Alina, could you reintroduce yourself and say your last name for us again? Because it's she has a Greek heritage, Greek Ukrainian, correct?
Yeah.
A Greek Ukrainian from Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then introduce yourself, and then we'll go forward with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation to participate in the meeting. I'm very happy and glad to be here. My name is Elina Haratsidou. I am a last year PhD student at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, where I work and research advanced nuclear fuels, fabrication, characterization, testing, and modeling of those. So I also do a lot of science communication, and we are going to talk a little bit about that today, alongside with nuclear waste management, as well as the Swedish concept on that. So if that's okay, I will share my slides now. And you can tell me if you can see them.
Yes, we can now.
Is it in the presenter mode?
Yes,
Not yet.
So you see the full screen, right?
yes.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I a little bit introduced myself already. I finished my bachelor's in physics in Greece. I did my master's in nuclear energy engineering at KTH in Sweden. And as I said, I am finalizing now my PhD studies in Sweden as well, focusing on uranium nitride fabrication, characterization, testing, and modeling, with a more specialization on lead-cooled small modular fast reactors. So today we're going to be talking about nuclear waste, how it's handled, as well as how to communicate around it. And I'm going to start from a little bit of an introduction, get into the Swedish design and concept and implementation of that, and then conclude with the science communication and nuclear communication. So nuclear waste, as predominantly most of you knows, is first of all multifaceted. When we talk about high-level waste from the nuclear industry, we talk about waste generated from spent nuclear fuel that can be generated in several different ways, from fission itself, as well as from capture of neutrons by uranium and consequently plutonium, which produces then transuranic elements and also minor actinides. Those are the elements that contribute to long-level waste that then needs to be treated, cooled down, and handled eventually for permanent storage. When it comes to high-level waste, specifically from light water reactors, here is a little bit of a more quantitative summary as to what one can expect in terms of kilograms produced per terawatt hour generated. And both here in the transuranic elements, we see that a good chunk of those is plutonium, so there's a lot of contribution from that. And in the minor actinide section, around half of those are coming from americium and curium. And interesting information on the side is that in Sweden, we roughly produce around 2 tons of transuranic elements annually from the nuclear industry. And we are going to talk a little bit more later on how we handle that and what we do with that. So when it comes to the fuel composition, generally after an average burnup that the fuel reaches inside a light water reactor, it looks kind of like the table that we can see on top. So uranium still dominates with something like 93% and followed by something like 5% fission products generated inside the fuel and a little over 1% of transuranic elements. Now, in the table below, we can see the transuranic elements by isotopes and different fractions that they have within the spent fuel that is produced, as well as different values of the elements after some time in the cooling pools, since we do have decay chains and reactions continuing even after the fission has been stopped and the reactor has been shut down. We have accumulation of elements such as plutonium, americium, curium, even after the shutdown of the reactor. When it comes to radiotoxicity, here is a quite simple graph, and however, quite explanatory as well, showing the different contributions of both fission products and transuranic elements to the radiotoxicity, the radiotoxic inventory. And we can see that fission products and transuranic elements account for a lot of that radiotoxicity in the beginning of the time of the spent nuclear fuel inside the cooling pools, and later on its time in the permanent facilities. However, the radiotoxicity of the fission products decreases or dies off relatively quickly. And here I say relatively because we're still discussing within the 1,000 years or so. However, relatively to what the level of transuranic elements is in relation to natural uranium levels, which it takes something like 1 million years to get there. So we can see here 2 things. Even though both fission products and transuranic elements are significantly important in the beginning of the end of life of the nuclear fuel, we can see that transuranic elements, and we do need storage evidently for hundreds of thousands of years in order for the levels of radiotoxicity to reach natural levels and for these waste to not be considered harmful to the environment or the people anymore. When it comes to the heat load in the high-level waste, here we see that in the beginning of time, as we discussed before, the heat is dominated by fission products. In the first 50 years, we can see down in the graph, cerium, strontium are the fission products that have quite a lot of heat generation in a relatively short period of time. And later on, americium kicks in and stays for longer time and is one of the predominant transuranic elements that we would like to handle, or even better, to transmute in order to reduce the heat load, hence the difficulty or trickiness that comes with handling spent nuclear fuel for permanent disposal because of the heat itself. Now, different countries have different concepts for high-level waste repositories, and that is mostly a geological choice as well as political and, of course, with safety in mind, as always. Sweden, Finland, and other European countries have chosen to dispose spent nuclear fuel in granite. That's what's predominantly available in those countries. Other countries have clay as availability, salt, volcanic tuff in the US. The rock in itself is not so much so the focus here as the safety and the engineering combined with the natural barriers is. So all of those different concepts try to develop a solution that works based on both barriers from the natural stability of the rock itself, as well as from engineered designs that could help maintain the fuel intact in the repository facilities and make sure that there is going to be no leak in the environment and potentially to the people as well. We can see that has already developed a design that they have been working and researching for quite a lot of years now. However, due to political issues, have not started making the geological repository up until very recently, where the decision was made. However, Finland, with a very similar geological and rock formation, has already started building their underground repository in Onkalo, which is expected to be up and running within the next short years, and is the first of its kind, the first repository for spent nuclear fuel for a permanent residence. And as I said, the Swedish government has okayed the construction of the repository also in Forsmark as well. So this is quite exciting news, and starting also within the next coming years, or hopefully even shorter than that. So let's talk a little bit more about the design itself. SKB is the company in Sweden that handles the spent radioactive waste and is the one that has the responsibility of figuring out a concept and also paying for the research, construction, and maintenance of these facilities for the spent nuclear fuel. Their concept is called KBS-3 method, and it does implement the defense in depth principle, which is applied in many aspects in the nuclear industry. And what we mean by defense in depth here, several different barriers of protection to try to stop the migration of radioactive elements from the fuel all the way to the environment. So trying to make that minimize the possibilities as much as possible, starting from the oxide fuel itself, since it's in a solid form. A lot of those elements, such as fission products and transuranic elements, do stay within the fuel itself. The second defense in depth barrier is the zircaloy cladding. Then the fuel bin, the cladding with the fuel pellets, is positioned in copper canisters, which do have an iron insert. So the fuel is sitting on squares specifically made for the fuel assemblies in a steel kind of casket in a way, surrounded by a copper canister. That whole canister is then deposited in a tunnel specifically made for it in the bedrock that is then filled up with bentonite clay. Bentonite clay expands and kind of surrounds the canister in a way that reduces water flow and also mitigates some of that movement in the bedrock. As well as the bedrock itself, the granite is the last barrier of the defense in depth. It's a very stable rock formation that has formed over something like 2 billion years ago with very, very minimal cracks and formations and very stable design in general that can and is very well used for this kind of purposes for a spent nuclear fuel. That's to mention the whole facility is 500 meters underground, and this then will eventually be backfilled with bentonite clay and with cement when all of the holes in a way will be filled with different canisters.
Oh, Alina?
Yeah.
Why copper?
So I actually have a slide that I hid to not get too much into the technicalities of it, but copper has been proven to have a much better corrosion resistance than steel does.
Okay.
So it will actually last for much more time than a classic steel in terms of corrosion in underground with the kind of water seeping through or the different kind of chemistry that exists underground in the bedrock. So there is a lot of science and research proving that copper is a better material in terms of corrosion resistance. That being said, there is also plenty of designs with a steel concept and also a lot of scientists supporting that potentially steel is a better option. In Sweden, we work quite a lot with copper. We have scientists on site that do research on corrosion in copper and therefore feel strongly about the fact that this is a very good choice. But that's not to say it's the only choice out there. Different countries have different concepts. Spain, for example, has a steel canister.
Okay, thank you.
So I partnered with SKB, and I have a video on YouTube about their facility that you can also go and look. I have shared the slides already with Michael, and you are welcome to also receive them afterwards as well and get in contact with me for follow-up questions as well. It's a quite nice facility. It's now closing down since the research part is finished. This was a research facility, which was basically a replica of how the real thing is going to look like. And they have finished all their work that they wanted to do and test. And now they are planning to close this facility down and start building the one that is actually meant for spent nuclear fuel and not for research. Now, you might quickly be thinking, why not use this facility for the spent nuclear fuel? The thing is that the facility for research was built in an area in Sweden that the bedrock was not the most stable. And that was done on purpose because they wanted to study both stable formations as well as unstable ones with simulated canisters and simulated fuels and simulated heating elements to see how the materials will perform under potentially water seeping through or some sort of movement activity. So it was very much focused on the proof of concept. And now that that has been done, they will go ahead and build it in the area that has been shown to have the better bedrock formation. So I wanted to show you a little part of their video on the canisters and the design. They do a very good work both on communicating about their work and their activities as well as with their animations, and it's quite explanatory. The video itself is long, so we're not going to watch the whole thing. I just wanted to show you some parts so you can get a little bit of a more visual and better understanding on how they look like. And here is me inside one of these copper canisters while visiting the facility. There was no spent nuclear fuel in this one, so no worries. So I'm just going to go a little bit ahead to show you the design. Oh.
What do you think the world will look like in 100,000? Final disposal is based on 3 different barriers that prevent the radioactive elements in the fuel from reaching humans and the environment. First, the spent fuel is placed in a protective copper canister that is resistant to corrosion. The encapsulation takes place in the facility that we want to build directly adjacent to the interim storage clab. Then, a steel lid is placed on the insert, and a copper lid is welded to the canister, which then becomes completely tight. The welding technique is called friction stir welding and provides a high-quality weld joint, free from pores and cracks. After welding, the weld joint is inspected with non-destructive testing so that it meets the quality requirements. Then, the canister is placed in a transport cask for further transport to the final repository. After transport by sea, the encapsulated spent nuclear fuel arrives at the spent fuel repository in Forsmark. The canister is transported by a special transport vehicle down a ramp to the transfer hall in the repository's central area. A deposition machine then transports the canister to the repository area, where it's placed in one of the vertical deposition holes. Around each canister, there's a buffer consisting of bentonite clay. The most important task of the bentonite clay is to prevent transport of substances to and from the canister. When the bentonite comes into contact with water, it swells. In the limited space in the deposition hole, it therefore becomes very compressed and compact. The buffer thus makes it difficult for water and other substances to get to or from the canister. In Forsmark, at a depth of 500 meters, there are only a few water-bearing fractures. The bedrock was formed almost plants today and in the future. As the canisters are deposited, the deposition tunnels are backfilled with bentonite clay. When an entire tunnel is filled, it's closed with a concrete plug. When all canisters are deposited, the entire tunnel system is backfilled up to the ground surface, and the facility above ground is demolished.
So we can see here a little bit of a more visual description of what I also described and presented before. And a quick thought here, of course, is that since the facility will be backfilled with cement all the way up, that means that there is no basically discussion for potential reprocessing of the fuel and potential recycling or making MOX fuel, since they will be quite cumbersome to recover. And that's what the Swedish government has decided to do as of now. So there is not really a discussion or a plan for fuel reprocessing, which would, of course, be a much better resource utilization. Nevertheless, this is a concept that will host all the spent nuclear fuel from the Swedish industry that has been generated up until now, as well as will be generated in the existing reactors until the end of their lifetime. So they have made a design that will host all the fuel that will be made and with a little bit of a margin left.
How many years of storage do you anticipate at this location? I mean, before it's filled up and you have to close it down.
Yeah. You mean how many years we expect the whole facility to last, or?
No, before you would shut it, close it down and shut it down, or have to expand it.
Yeah, so the thing is that there is no plan to expand it, since they are building it in a way that it will host all the fuel that is and will be generated from the existing reactors. And I keep saying the existing reactors, which means that if we start building new reactors, there will need to be a new facility. And that being said, we don't need to wait to start storing the fuel that's already been in the interim storages and the pools, which means that once the facility is built and up and running, we can already start depositing the fuel from the previous reactor fuel cycles and the fuel that's already cooled down enough to go into the repository. The last fuel that will be used in reactors, whenever the end of their lifetime will come, will of course have to stay for a few years in the cooling pools, and then will be deposited and able to be transported and deposited in this facility. So I would say it could be closed and backfilled maybe 5 to 10 years after the last reactor that's existing is stops operating.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
this is John. Elena, if I could ask, what's the current disposal method prior to this new facility being built? How are you currently disposing of the nuclear waste in the reactors in Sweden?
Yeah, so at the moment we have interim storage facilities, and most of them are in a pool-like setup. So the picture I showed a few slides ago was actually from a power plant in Sweden, and it has been residing there since it's been taken out of the reactor. This concept and this idea started quite early in Sweden. They started researching these geological repository for spent nuclear fuel around 40 to 50 years ago. So we are talking for a good few decades of research that has now come to the maturity level that, yes, this can be built, this will actually work. And when I say now, I mean maybe half a decade ago. However, the political framework back in the day was not so favorable. Therefore, there was some delays. Hence, also one can see that Finland did pick it up quite faster and are already almost finishing up with their facility. So to answer your question, in the interim storage facilities, there hasn't been a permanent disposal facility yet in Sweden. Okay. So I will move on to a slide about dose commitment. And here we are referring to potential dose that a critical group, so a group of people can receive from exposure of radioactive material and elements from the spent nuclear fuel if there was potentially a leak in a facility like that. And here we are looking at different types of fission products that could potentially migrate and penetrate through and make their way up and expose people and environment into levels of radiation. However, what one can see is that even though their radiotoxicity lasts for many hundreds of thousands years, we are still talking at levels and doses that are several orders of magnitude lower than the background radiation and the dose we receive from background radiation just by basically existing on Earth. Therefore, they, after something like a few thousand years, will not pose a critical danger or threat to the people or the environment in case there was a seep of radioactive material back into the surface. However, this is not necessarily information that is available to the public or people that are non-experts or not specializing in nuclear fuel. And even throughout my research as well, I have seen a lot of pushback of people wanting to collaborate, work, or even talk about things that have to do with uranium, nuclear energy, nuclear fuel, and so on. So the problem that we face in the field and in the industry, the way I see it and the way I pose it, is not like in other places where there is a lack of information about things. In the nuclear industry, we are quite lucky and unlucky at the same time. That is a popular and at the same time controversial issue, that there is a lot of information out there, however, not necessarily of scientific integrity or objectivity, or even being factual for that matter. So we have an interestingly unique problem in which we don't only have to work on informing, but we also have to work on demystifying all of this misinformation that has potentially been created in people's minds due to how information was handled back in the day when it comes to nuclear industry, and a lot of lack of transparency around it that led to mistrust of people towards the field itself. So inspired by those setbacks, and also setbacks that are not just societally applicable, but also affect my research specifically as well, I propose the fact that it is up to the nuclear scientists and the nuclear experts themselves that have the responsibility to create flat platforms that are easily accessible, widely open, and interestingly easy to understand, and provide informations that have to do with nuclear energy, nuclear power, how do we work, what do we work with, and what are our goals in a transparent way with a scientific quality and the level of objectivity without opinion-based science, which exists a lot out there. That being said, it's not really like we have the option in our field to not talk about our work, because we have seen time and time again that if we don't do the talking as qualified experts in the field, then people with much less qualification do. And they already do that. So there is a lot of opinion-based channels and a lot of unscientific information provided that caters towards one opinion or the other, that doesn't particularly support facts or put things into context. So that's not just a thing that is somewhat negative, but it's a thing that has effects on policymaking, on public perceptions, on awareness and acceptance of the work that we do, that later on can, of course, have effects on if we are going to implement a policy or not, depending on if people agree on it or not. So when it comes to outreach, I personally think that it is not just a nice thing to do on one's free time as a scientist or an expert in the field, but it's quite essential for several different reasons. It is somewhat our obligation to communicate our science to the public, to simply make them aware without even trying to implement some different opinion, and hopefully through educated discussions and educated approach, let people understand and get aware on what are the important things to handle with when it comes to this industry and what we need to concern ourselves with. For example, we cannot disregard the fact that we have nuclear waste, so there needs to be a way to handle it, and as well as increase generally interest in the field and how I call it mainstream the field itself. It is much more easier and there is much less barrier to start, for example, talking about renewable energies rather than there is talking about nuclear power. That might be something that you have experienced in your everyday talks. There is a little bit of a taboo or inhibition when one starts a discussion about nuclear power because you don't know exactly how it will always be perceived. Of course, it has also positive benefits as to the fact that by talking to people, one can also attract more people in the future nuclear workforce. We do see that a lot of countries are interested in expanding their nuclear capacities, and everyone pretty much at this time talks about competence in the nuclear field and the fact that we will need more people in the field. So that's a great way to do so is by science communication and through talking about one's work, as well as influence, of course, stakeholders and policymakers. In this framework, I have a scientific YouTube channel, which called Your Friendly Nuclear Physicist. And there I post videos that are both educational and entertaining that touch upon what is the nuclear industry, how does a reactor work. I show videos from the nuclear fuel lab where I work, talk about uranium and the differences between activated samples versus natural uranium and all kinds of information that I find interesting and not so easily accessible for the public. And it has quite the significant reach, which is a good thing. We can see that people are actually interested in knowing more, in getting some science-based and factual information about the nuclear industry. And there is quite a big spread. You see that the ages and the countries of the people watching the videos are quite wide. There is all kinds of backgrounds, is predominantly English-speaking countries following my channels. My videos are in English. Nevertheless, other countries in Europe predominantly also follow as well, since one can use subtitles from the YouTube options. And in a way, try to make it not just sounding like a lecture, but sounding more casual and more approachable, while at the same time introducing some of that science within the videos as well. In this work, I have done a lot of, and am doing a lot of communication workshops, such as advising the European Commission and Joint Research Center on nuclear advocacy, participating in a lot of conferences that are very technical on nuclear materials science and nuclear fuel, talking about science communication, as well as the workshop that and the discussion that we are having today as well. And this is a little bit of a future works that I am arranging with people, like the Greek Atomic Energy Commission is now also interested in discussing about how to handle its radioactive waste, mostly for medical purposes, but not just in a way of how to handle it, but how to handle the discussion around it. Is something that people struggle in Greece. The nuclear issue is quite a big taboo there still. I want to here provide an example about information availability. I mentioned before that we do have lots of information in our field that's available out there. This is an example from the decision of Japan with TEPCO and IAEA to release the treated water from the Fukushima Daiichi accident into the ocean. And on the one the left-hand side, we do see the IAEA report. It's quite comprehensive, very long, extensive title. And on the right side, we see a Reuters news article that features a picture from a Korean demonstration talking about China banning seafood from Japan because they consider it being radioactive now that they will decide to release the water into the ocean. We do see that even though both of the news articles or the information exists online, the reach that these two sites get is quite different in terms of the number of people visiting the sites every day. We see there are several orders of magnitude difference in between, meaning that even though we do have scientific information that's out there, like the IAEA website, it's not enough in order to reach a great amount of people, and a lot of times is being hidden or mixed up within the plethora of other information that's out there that is not necessarily science-based. Here I take an example from my YouTube channel where I did a video on the water release from the Fukushima power plant, and I read the IAEA report, explained in my video the process that they will use to treat the water, and describe the different levels of discharge that in becquerel will have into the ocean every year, compared that with other countries and their discharge annually. And here what we can see in this graph that exists in the IAEA report is that Japan plans to release something like 22 trillion becquerel into the ocean over a time span of 30 years. That's the plan with the water that they have collected and the time span that they want to release it into the ocean. At the same time, China releases something like 5 times that annually. So it is quite evident and easily understandable that the news articles around China being concerned with Japanese seafood being radioactive is not so much so a scientific-based concern, but it's very much a political reasoning behind it that is nevertheless harming the industry. It's harming the public perception. It's harming the way that people perceive how these decisions are being made, because there potentially might be people that think that it's reckless to release the water into the ocean. But when we compare it, already existing implementations where existing power plants release annually tritium into the water, we see that the levels of radioactivity are much, much more significant compared to what Japan is planning to do. And therefore, putting things in perspective, one gets to understand that, okay, maybe it's not as serious as it was shown in the beginning to be, or so dangerous, since we already kind of doing it and there is not a serious issue with that. And potentially this wasn't really, anything to concern ourselves with, but just maybe a political way of approaching an issue. Here I put 2 different comparisons. The online platforms that I described before, so the Reuters website, news website, the IAEA, and my YouTube channel. And I got a little bit of statistics. I went a little bit on Googling and got the impressions per month that these platforms get. For Reuters and IAEA, you saw that before, I already reported it. For my YouTube channel, there is plenty of statistics on YouTube, so that's quite nice and easy to extract. So it's something like 10 to the power of 5, so similar number of people visiting monthly like the IAEA website. Nevertheless, the number of employees that actually work on communication and outreach for Reuters is something like 25,000 people, not being said that all of them are doing nuclear-related reports. No, however, they all work towards news articles and communication pieces. In the IAEA, something like 2,500 people. And for my YouTube channel, I put half, since I am one person working on it and I am a full-time PhD student, so I don't do YouTube nearly close to full-time. So I thought half is more reasonable. And then I made up a factor called the impact efficiency. That's basically to show how many people needed to work on a news article versus the number of people that this news article managed to reach. So that's the impact efficiency, basically a division between the impressions and the employees. For Reuters, we have something like 400,000. Here, the number, absolute value is not really important. It's the order of magnitude we are comparing. For IAEA, it's something like 40, meaning that even though they do quite a lot of communication and outreach, there is not a lot of that is reaching the public and the people. And for the YouTube channel, 200,000. So we're talking about the same order of magnitude with the Reuters website. And here, that's a very, very important and good indication, because it does show us again that there is quite a lot of interest for scientific-based information around nuclear. And if one channel like the one I have with posts that are not particularly regularly, maybe once a month, making a post about nuclear power can have this kind of reach, that means that if organizations, companies, institutions, universities joined forces and did this kind of outreach, that we could potentially try to balance out those masses of information that we have out there that are not science-based versus the one that we would be providing from the field itself. We do already have a lot of examples of successful communicators in the nuclear field as well. So we can take already example of people who are doing quite a lot of outreach. Here I'm showing only the online outreach. That's not to say that it's more important than the on-site. Absolutely not, especially when one tries to get in contact with local people, local authorities. On-site communication is essential. However, online is quite easy to find and easy to reach a very big audience. Therefore, it's much easier also to showcase here. That being said, we can see that where there is a will, there is a way. There is ways to communicate around our work and around nuclear power. We haven't been really good at doing that in the industry, and this is changing now. We see that there is a lot of change and trend towards a more transparent way of communicating our work and informing the public about what we do. And this is excellent to see. However, we do have to keep in mind a little bit, how do we do that? Not every one of us has been necessarily educated in how to do communication. So it's not trivial when one wants to communicate, knowing how to approach it and how to do that. So when we think about communication, the first thing that we have to think about is the audience. A lot of times we might be focusing on, what is it that I want to talk about? Because we do assume that we are talking with people that care about what we have to say. We are usually talking with our colleagues, with our peers, and people who are interested in our work. However, that assumption doesn't really apply to pretty much anyone else outside of our field of work. We cannot assume that the person we are talking to will necessarily be interested in what we're talking about. Therefore, we have to start from the audience itself. The audience has plenty of characteristics. This can be age, gender, their education, their nationality, their background, what is their platform of choices if the communication is online, and all information that we can gather about our audience can help us to shape our communication in a way that is much more targeted and much more interesting and engaging for that particular audience. Here I have simplified the classification of the audiences in 3 different categories. I start with the family, and these I call family because are the people that have the closest expertise to our expertise. So if, for example, one works in a university, then the scientists, the immediate colleagues in the same scientific field is what I call the family. These are the people that know very closely what we are doing, potentially doing very similar things, and are quite interested in what we are doing, and we are also in what they are doing. The next category I call friends, and these are scientists, engineers, or people in adjacent fields that have a notion of what nuclear power is, have a little bit of a good understanding. However, they are not nuclear experts in any way. And we would potentially like to collaborate with these people because we see that more and more we do bring lots of new knowledge and expertise from other fields into the nuclear field. Take additive manufacturing, 3D printing, AI, computer science. So we do need lots of people from adjacent fields to also join the nuclear task force and for us to collaborate together. And lastly, we have the so-called acquaintances. These are basically all the people that don't belong in the previous 2 categories. It can be the public, it can be policymakers, it can be stakeholders, anyone who doesn't necessarily share any significant knowledge on nuclear power or nuclear energy or our field specifically. And then once we have kind of gotten an understanding of our audience, we can then move on into our message. And even if we are in the process of thinking what we want to communicate, we have to go through a sort of stepwise process to get there. There is a lot of ways to make a message more attractive and more interesting, starting by a unique selling point. What is that one thing that I communicate that sets me apart from other people? For example, one of the unique selling points that I see in my YouTube channel is the fact that I can show things from the nuclear fuel lab. I can show uranium fuels, I can talk about them, I can hold them up in the camera, and this is something that I see that the people appreciate. This is not something that you can easily see on the internet, and therefore it draws a lot of attention. The second point is authenticity. And here by what I mean is that sometimes we refrain from talking about challenges when it comes to our work because there is a lot of judgment when it comes to the nuclear industry as a whole. However, that doesn't do us any favors. On the other hand, what we should instead be focusing on is to bring out those challenges in the way that we are addressing them from our own work by ourselves from the start. By doing so, we create an authenticity, we create a connection and a trust between ourselves and the public that does show that, yes, we do have still issues that we are figuring out. This is not a fully solved problem. However, these are the ways that we are trying to approach it. Instead of trying to, in a way, pitch salesy, sells an idea that sounds a little bit too good to be true, and people do feel that and get a little bit more resistant into accepting it. Relatability connects. And what do I mean here is that we need to find the connection between the people that we are targeting our communication to and our message. We cannot just go with our message and expect people to care or understand, but we have to find what is interesting for them. For example, discussing with the public that they might be interested in potential health concerns when it comes to nuclear waste handling. They might be interested in electricity prices when it comes to, should we connect more nuclear power plants to the grid, or should we use more renewable energies or fossil fuels? These are things that we can bring to a level that is relatable to the group of people that we're talking to in order to bridge that understanding and create that connection. What is your message and how you can connect it to the audience's needs? Here, the need of the audience is what basically the audience comes for. We come to listen to a talk because we want to get something out of it, and that something is usually very much connected to our needs. So, for example, if we are targeting to talk about our work to a group of high school students, and going into the discussion by discussing electricity prices might be very relevant for the average adult person who pays electricity bills, however, might be very much irrelevant and uninteresting to a teenager. So then one can bring the discussion to more relevant issues like, for example, energy and electricity stability when it comes to stable internet connections, or your computer working the way you want it, or things that relate much more to the audience, the particular one that we are targeting. And lastly, then we have arrived to the point that we can discuss, what do we do about it? This is kind of what we wanted to start with. We want to start with, I want to talk about my work, but we have to go through these steps to create the trust, to create the interest, to build a few layers already with the target audience, to then get them curious and wanting to hear about, okay, so what do you do about it? What's your work when it comes to that regard? When it comes to communication activities, there is a lot of different activities one can do depending on the target audience, either if it's online or on site, or if we are talking about students, or we are talking about people in our field, or retired people in other fields, or politicians, or any kind of group that we are targeting are interested in. There is a lot of need for scientists to have more of a public face in a way. So there is a lot of discussions in TV about nuclear energy, nuclear power. And a lot of times I see, from example, from Greece, that there is not many scientists discussing issues about nuclear energy, nuclear power, but it's a lot of people who have just opinions about it. So that being said, I highly and strongly encourage people to get onto the media, to get on the public platforms that are very easily accessible by people, and talk about what you do, about your science, about the issues that we are facing and how we are trying to tackle these challenges, creating a more approachable face to the nuclear industry in a way, because people see that, oh, they're also a person like me, and they're talking about issues that I before considered to be fully outlandish or super risky. And now I'm potentially starting to reconsider that, yeah, this might be a reasonable thing. Or maybe I even see a role model potential that sounds interesting. Maybe I could work in that industry as well. Other great things to engage with the public and especially with the younger audiences is through different science fairs and school activities. There is a lot of that work that we do here in Sweden, in Greece, and other countries as well, where we go to schools and also bring school classes to our university, give them a little bit of an experience of how it's like to be a researcher in the nuclear industry, how it's like to do nuclear research. We show things from the lab, we talk about our work, we have a lot of components that evidently we cannot show or have kids to touch, but we have seen that we have a lot of big benefits from 3D printed components. So we have basically 3D printed a smaller version of a reactor where all of the different components can be disassembled. And it's very much powerful to bring that in a school or a science fair and have kids basically play around without, ask what every component is and what does this do, have a kind of two-scale understanding between different components, have real size 3D printed nuclear fuel where we can show and talk about its energy density. For example, that 2 nuclear fuel pellets can power a household needs of electricity for a full year. People get very interested in that and get a very good grasp and physical understanding of how much energy this entails compared to the tons of, for example, coal necessary to produce the same amount of energy. It is very important as well to focus on communication and education workshops, and that's something that we do a lot in the research and academic aspect of it, as well as in the companies. And this is a small version of the workshops that I usually host for people that are more interactive. And it's very, very nice and important to see that people are engaged and want to know more how to do science communication. And I would say most importantly, having a presence, both physical and online, is quite essential. It's not so much so that it might be a little bit scary or uncomfortable saying something in an interview that one is not particularly expert on. We have to keep in mind that we think, or we are experts in a very certain thing in the nuclear field. However, from a person outside of the field, for a general person from the public, we are experts in nuclear, period. We are considered as experts in everything nuclear. And that's both a little bit unrealistic, because this is not the case. We cannot know everything about everything. And at the same time, does show that we need to put ourselves more out there, giving our understanding of what the different levels of knowledge are, what knowledge do we have, and also, yes, do make some educated guesses and assumptions about how things could work. For example, when people ask, how long are we before building small modular reactors? Well, no one can really answer, but we from the industry and from the field have a much better understanding to give an educated guess than anyone else from the public does. And I would like to leave you with the message of activity on social media is pretty much a given and a must in 2025, 21st century. If we don't exist online, it's as if we don't exist at all. So online communication through different platforms, depending on the target audience, is essential and has to be there. And it is a very powerful tool for people from all around the world to know what an organization is doing, what are their challenges, how are they tackling them, who are the people working there. Is a great tool to have presence, and even though not being able to be everywhere at the same time, still being able to provide all of that knowledge and information out there to be available for people to access. So I would like to summarize a little bit. The spent nuclear fuel that we have and that we generate from the nuclear industry needs to be isolated from the people and the environment for over hundreds of thousands of years. That is a given. That's something that is not disputable. We have to have a way to handle this. High-level long-term waste concepts designed based on defense in-depth principles in mind have several barriers of retaining the radioactive elements and not allowing them to seep into the environment and expose people to levels of radiation. Different rocks, different geological formations that exist in different countries are basically targeting the same focus. We are all focused on the same safety functions, both from coupled engineering approach together with the natural safety barriers that these rocks can provide. If anything, the SKB method and the KBS method that they developed in Sweden proves that both trust and technology are essential for progress to happen. They have, as long as they have been doing R&D on the geological repository for spent nuclear fuel, they have been doing a lot of outreach, reaching out to the communities, having a lot of open events, a lot of transparency, visits of people in the research facility. And we are talking about decades of work that made the community from having the mentality of not in my backyard to basically competing as to which community would want to build the permanent geological repository for all the benefits that it can provide, like job opportunities and so on. So it is a clear example that communication is not just a soft skill that's nice to do sometimes in our field, but it's essential to progress, because even if we do have all the technological readiness, we might get stalled because the public or the policymakers don't agree with the implementation of this design. We do have a lot of diversity in terms of global disposal, and we do get a lot of information also from the research that happens in the United States, like the borehole work that adds quite an interesting and different understanding on disposal and different potential ideas and opinions that we can use for disposing spent nuclear fuel. Nevertheless, we still see that there is a pause of that predominantly can be attributed to lack of consensus between the public and the policymakers, and not so much so the technical aspect of it. So communication is not optional, but it's a key component to the progress in our field, and transparent communication is indeed the most enduring containment barrier of all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Elena. Do we have any questions from the committee, either in the room here or online?
Chairman, this is John.
Go ahead.
Elena, thank you. Elena, can you speak a little bit to the acceptance level of the community in Sweden where the repository is being planned? What is there? Is there a lot of opposition? I live in an area where that borehole experiment was scheduled to take place, and there, I appreciate your comments because the communication link was broken in our case. I'm just wondering how that worked in the area that you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. It's actually quite important. I would say that not only the technological aspect of the SKB is interesting and important for our field, but the way they did their communication is actually quite innovative in a way for speaking something like 40, 50 years ago, where most of the nuclear industry wasn't really that open and transparent on talking about the ways they handle different things. When it comes to nuclear waste, it is one of the most tricky things that we can address with the public. And nevertheless, with a lot of basically openness, they organized events to have public to just come and ask questions to the company itself. They organized open tours to the labs and the facilities and to talk with the researchers. They went to schools, they went to science fairs, they went to, you name it. They made posters and posted them around the city in like restaurants, in coffee places, in basically everywhere they could. They have interesting cars with different logos that already showcase the underground facility on the car. So that's quite, they have a lot of different ways of being open about it. So one of the first things that they did is simply being open about the fact that not only we do have nuclear waste that we need to handle, but we have an idea and a solution in place about it, and we are doing research on it. So they, in a way, welcomed the people to know about this idea and this work, and the public almost could follow the research as it was happening. And with that, and with all of the scientific output, the articles and everything, and communicating that to the public, because you don't expect them to read the scientific articles, but communicate that to the public in an understandable way, they managed to get from an opposition, from a community that really didn't want that, like a lot of other communities we see that they don't, to pretty much competing amongst 2-3 municipalities in Sweden as to where this facility could have been built.
Thank you, Elena. Senator Barta has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Patton. Elena, can you speak to the, I guess, two-part question to the economics of it? This KSB3 method, what are we looking at? Obviously, costs in Sweden and Finland are different than what we have here, but, what, just the ballpark area, what are we talking about the cost to develop? And then kind of dovetailing what Representative Nelson was asking on the acceptance, the economic impact of it, and how that feeds into acceptance.
Mm-hmm. So one of the very good approaches that the Swedish nuclear industry took from the beginning, basically since they built the nuclear reactors, was that they decided that there should be a way to handle the nuclear waste, at least financially at the moment of the building of the reactors. And even though there wasn't a technological readiness kind of implemented or in place, they decided that the people who produce the nuclear waste, basically the nuclear power plant owners, are the ones responsible to also handle the waste. And that's not just a responsibility in terms of figuring out a means, but also paying for it. So what they did is the company, SKB, collected a few cents, if you want, is crowns in Swedish, but the currency is not the important thing here. They collected a few cents per kilowatt that being sold from nuclear energy produced electricity. And they collected that for a kind of bucket of money to potentially later on handle the waste issue and being able to research that. So the more, of course, we use nuclear energy, and from the start, the more electricity is being produced, the more parts or small percentage of that is going into that fund for handling the nuclear waste. So basically, from the start of the nuclear era in Sweden, if you will, there was already some fund and some amount that people could start thinking and looking into it. All of that progress, all of that 40 years of R&D and human resources and salaries and drilling and everything, you name it, has so far been paid from that fund. So this is important. That is an interesting kind of aspect. It's a small detail, but it's very important for the people, because this is not taxpayers' money. This is money that the nuclear power plants make and have to, in a way, have a small fee, if you will, for the handling of the nuclear fuel waste. I think that's very powerful, because it's not just showing that, oh yeah, it's an important thing that at some point we will try to handle, but it really shows this proactive thinking that before even having a technology in place, they already have the thought that, yes, but we will need to have funds and in place and money to handle that. That being said, in terms of specific numbers, I don't recall now. I could follow up in an email. We are talking in the ballpark of a few billion Swedish crowns, which is equivalent of a couple of million US dollars. But I don't have exactly the number in my head now. But they do have a lot of presentations and discussion about that. So I could actually find that out and send it to you.
Thank you, Elena. Ed?
Elena, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to speak on short notice. We got caught by the shutdown with the speakers that we had lined up, but this has worked out really well, and want to thank Ian Gilly that reached out to you and arranged this. So one of your early slides, you showed on spent fuel that was cooling, had cooled for 4 years, 89% plutonium. So would that have come from a breeder reactor, or was that reprocessed fuel to have that high percentage?
No, it's from a light water reactor. The percentage, 98%, means of the transuranic elements. So we're not talking about the whole spent fuel, but of the percentage of the transuranic elements, which was something like 5%, if I'm not mistaken, 98% of that is plutonium. That's what the value means.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, Elena, we have a beautiful sunny fall day here in North Dakota. I hope your weather is as good as ours is, but it's like this all the time in North Dakota. So
Nice.
we very much appreciate you taking the time. And again, as Ed said, on very short notice. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
You're welcome to hang around if you want to listen to the next presentation. Otherwise, thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for having me, and have a good continuation of your meeting.
You bet.
Bye.
We are just running just a little bit behind, but our next presentation is from Rod McCollum. He's a senior director, decommissioning and used fuel for the Nuclear Energy Institute. He's going to talk about used nuclear fuel. I believe Rod is online and also in a vehicle.
Can you hear me, Ed?
Yes.
Yes, I'm glad to see that I'm not the only person in a car. Yeah, thank you, Ed, for reaching out to NEI, and I understand a lot of things are getting disrupted by the shutdown. I know the folks from DOE would have wanted to be here. I thank you, and I understand somebody's going to be running slides from your end. I certainly can't do it from here. But if not, I'll just talk. But if you can go ahead and pull up the slides while I introduce myself. I think, first of all, you just heard as good a presentation on geologic disposal from Elena as you're ever going to hear. That was excellent. I also really commend her for her effort as a technical expert to communicate in a way that meets people where they are. I think the long and the short of the history of trying to site one of these permanent geologic disposal facilities in the United States is that the technical people didn't communicate very well, myself included, and the folks who like to oppose all nuclear things simply out-communicated the experts. And I'll talk about where we are, and I did also submit a letter that my organization, the Nuclear Energy Institute, submitted recently to the Secretary of Energy that kind of lays out our vision for where we go from here. Ed, are you able to pull up those slides?
We are.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I'm Rod McCollum from the Nuclear Energy Institute. I've been in the nuclear industry for 40 years, the last 27 of those at NEI. We represent the nuclear industry in Washington, D.C., so I work with the folks in DOE and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The folks in DOE who would have been here today are close associates of mine, and they're doing a very good job of trying to get us into a place where we can communicate as effectively as the Swedes are. I'm a nuclear engineer. During my 27 years at NEI, I have always been involved with spent fuel management. I've been proud to represent the segment of this industry that has assured the safety of all of the spent fuel, or we call it used fuel, or high-level radioactive waste that we've produced, and has set that up for long-term success. Done a few other interesting things at NEI, but anyway, if we can get the slides up and go to the first one. I have a few basics here because and this is pretty much a standard slide deck. I'm not seeing the slides. Are you folks seeing them?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, I'll just assume you're on the same page I am, and if it sounds strange, please let me know. I have the first slide after the title slide here is categories of radioactive waste. In the United States, low-level radioactive waste, things from hospitals, radiopharmaceuticals, and nuclear plants, as well as what the Europeans call intermediate level waste, there we go, or greater than Class C waste in the United States. We have disposal capacity, aplenty for that. So what we're really talking about in terms of putting the final capstone on environmental stewardship with the nuclear industry is where are we going to dispose of the high level waste, which we call used nuclear fuel. If you can go on to the next slide. Very basic, if I'm dwelling too much on the basics, I was told some of you have different levels of expertise here, but I do commend the folks, the state of North Dakota, for putting together a panel like this and giving this issue such deep consideration. Nuclear fuel looks the same coming out of a reactor as it does going into the reactor. You see the fission process, those long-lived fission products and other byproducts such as plutonium and some of the other cousins of uranium that end up in there. They all stay inside the fuel. This fuel is designed to function in nuclear reactors under extremely harsh conditions, high temperatures, high pressures, vicious fluid flow, and it comes out in pristine condition. If we were not good at designing fuel to survive these conditions, we wouldn't be a very successful industry, but we are. And then when we take it out of the reactor and put it into storage, it's pretty much easy on the fuel from there. The fuel is in an inert environment at much lower temperatures, ambient or near ambient pressures, and protected by robust systems with no moving parts. About those systems, here's what we know in the United States about used fuel. Moving on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Maybe there's a delay. Yeah, we know dry storage. You see to the right, and I'll talk more about this. These are the silos. All of our used fuel is still stored at the plants in these dry storage systems after it comes out of the pools. These are also transportable, and many of them are disposable. You could certainly design a system, or you could design a repository for around the existing containers that would allow these to be disposed of once they come out of the reactor and never have to be opened. Innovation moves at the speed it needs to. When we built we built over 100 nuclear plants. We currently have 95 operating and are hoping to see many more in the near future. The idea was that the government would take the waste and reprocess it. Now, as Elena alluded to, when you reprocess it, you can get some useful components out of it, but you still have the long-lived fission products that require the 100,000 years of isolation. What Sweden and Finland, which is actually beginning to load their repository, Switzerland, France, and other countries are proving. But anyway, there's been a lot of, I skipped over, there's been a lot of innovation in the U.S. program because we didn't envision needing all these storage systems. Now we have them aplenty, and they work very well, and they're secure for a long time while we figure out what the Scandinavian countries have already figured out, which is, of course, that disposal isn't really that difficult scientifically or technologically. Communications around disposal are, and disposal is the holy grail of the anti-nuclear establishment in that, you can stop a lot of nuclear things if you can prevent them from having a disposal solution. Future decisions can be made in the future. Again, we've bought ourselves a lot of time here. And recycling decisions are already being made. There's an executive order on used fuel, which the letter I sent refers to and is in response to. That is primarily oriented on recycling, not because it makes the disposal question go away. It does reduce the cost of disposal if you do it right, but it is a means of fuel supply. as we expand the nuclear industry, and it's this administration's goal to quadruple it. The last administration had committed internationally to tripling nuclear output by 2050. So it's kind of a one-upsmanship in terms of which party wants more nuclear energy right now. Both parties have passed pro-nuclear measures on the Hill without a single, well, they passed overall measures such as the Inflation Reduction Act and the Big Beautiful Bill, but in both of those measures, there was support for rapid expansion of the nuclear industry. So this administration, and really even under the Democrats, recycling was being funded to an extent greater than I'd ever seen it in my 27 years on this end of the business. Those decisions are being made today as a matter of fuel supply. If you're going to expand rapidly nuclear energy, you're going to need a lot of fuel. And, well, we don't want it to come from Russia. And Russia had previously, prior to the invasion of Ukraine, been the world's largest supplier of nuclear fuel. So the market is adjusting. If we can go on to the next slide. So there's really 5 phases of used fuel management. This is what we call an integrated approach. Inside the plant, you see a spent fuel pool. You see workers standing above it. They're not receiving any radiation. I've stood above a spent fuel pool. There's 20 feet of water above the top of the fuel, and that blocks all the radiation from reaching the humans above. Then it goes outside the plant into the dry cask storage systems. I'll have a slide with a lot of data on those. This is where the innovators really came to work. We didn't know we'd need these systems. We thought the government would just show up with a transportation container, take it away to a reprocessing plant. Indeed, there was some reprocessing infrastructure developed in the United States in places like West Valley, New York, and Morris, Illinois, but Jimmy Carter made the decision in the 1980s to, well, we're not going to, or 1970s, we're not going to reprocess because if we do it, the rest of the world will do it. And what you primarily get out of reprocessing from the old school approaches is plutonium, which you use to make energy, which is what France does, and Russia does that. The UK used to, and Japan has a facility they're trying to get started. But you extract plutonium for the production of more energy. There are other energy producing components you can extract that more advanced, more modern reprocessing schemes would take care of. But anyway, when Jimmy Carter made that decision to not reprocess, this is a tale, I don't know if it's true, but I think history bears out it's kind of what happened. When Jimmy Carter made the decision to not reprocess so that other countries would follow the US lead and not reprocess, the French energy minister dialed up his chief engineer and said, double the capacity of our facility, the U.S. just got out of the market. So that decision didn't even hold for one minute. So that's the away from the plant and back again. And that's why we have the dry cask storage now, because we made a decision not to reprocess. Again, we would still need disposal in either case. There have been efforts to consolidate storage. To take these dry casks, which are transportable, and move them to other locations where they can be more efficiently managed. You have one security fence, one group of security guards, one group of cameras watching them. And then, of course, away from civilization, which is the geologic disposal imperative. So if you go on to the next slide, a few more things about the dry storage. Here you see the internals of these casks. You've got, first of all, you have the fuel itself has a lot of barriers built into it. It's nuclear waste is not oozing green goo. It's solid ceramic fuel that does contain all of those radioactive fragments. Zirconium cladding, which is designed to operate in reactors and now finds itself in an inert environment. If we have any defects in the cladding, when it comes out of the reactor, we put another barrier around it called a damaged fuel can. And you can see the internals are very sophisticated as well as the externals very robust. If you want to know how sturdy these are, yes, we do provide security for them, but an attack on a spent fuel storage facility would be a waste of a lot of weaponry. I mean, obviously you could hit it with a nuclear weapon, but that kind of becomes a little bit silly. You can Google Holtec missile test And you can see a missile fired at 600 miles an hour into one of these without its protective overpack, and it withstands. Yes, could you design a more robust missile that could hurt it? But again, we're getting into speculating about the kind of weaponry that you have a national defense thing. These are very, again, stressing. The fuel that has been designed for reactor conditions that has many barriers built into it sits in systems that an inert gas, no moving parts, no driving energy force, and of course they are transportable. This is just the numbers of how many of these we have. We've been loading these systems since 1986. It wasn't long before we decided not to reprocess that our spent fuel pools in the reactors began filling up. We've extended the license of these systems for 60 years. They're extendable in 40-year increments, and NRC, under another executive order, is looking at its regulations. These extensions the extension periods might grow because we have a lot of science that indicates these things are good for the long term. We have an environmental impact statement that indicates they're good for at least 100 years. Of course, the goal is not to keep storing at the sites forever. The goal is to become more efficient as an industry, to consolidate and eventually dispose. But as you can see, we've loaded over 4,000 of these systems, and we haven't had a single instant. There really hasn't been any kind of occurrence that would cause people to be worried about radiation escaping. So storage, transportation, and disposal. Here you see a transportation conveyance. You see a couple proposed interim storage facilities, and you see the Yucca Mountain site, which for over 20 years was the site the U.S. worked on to try to have a disposal facility like Sweden. Again, it was a failure of communications. Elena couldn't have said it any better. And one of these, this slide's slightly out of date, one of these interim storage facilities is in Texas, the other's in New Mexico. They're about 50 miles apart. The one in New Mexico, both states challenged the facilities. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that NRC did have, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did have the authority to license the facilities. And however, despite the fact that the Supreme Court ruled in their favor, the facility in New Mexico decided not to go ahead and build because the New Mexico state opposition was still there. I participated in a lot of the dialogue with the state and the company trying to do that, and I can tell you I learned a lot of communication lessons that I wish Elena was there. The facility in Texas, was there a question?
No.
Yeah, I talk too fast sometimes, so please stop me if that occurs. The facility in Texas, it's unclear whether or not it will move forward, certainly not in the immediate future. And then here's more examples of transportation. People, one of the things that will happen is if you consider a spent fuel facility, whether it's storage, recycling, disposal, or it really works best if you co-locate all of those things. Certainly the best economic opportunity is there. The anti-nuclear establishment will flood the airwaves or flood the social media, as it were, with stories about how this stuff is too dangerous to ship. Well, we have a tremendous experience shipping in the United States. Overseas, it's even more routine. You see the French shipments here. Literally in France, where they reprocess, they have about 50 reactors at maybe 20 or 30 sites. I'm not sure the exact numbers. They ship the used fuel routinely from the reactors to the coast of Normandy, the Le Hague facility, which I would encourage you to visit if you get the chance. You'll learn a lot there. And they reprocess it. They store the radioactive byproducts that Elena talked about for permanent disposal. They have a repository under development. It's in a pilot phase right now. They're very much involving the community in this, which is a real important part of this. In defining what the facility is in a place called Sigio in the Bray region of France. But then they ship the new fuel that they use, the plutonium, to make, that they reprocess out of the old fuel back to the reactors all over the country. Well, they first of all they ship the plutonium to the south of France where they put it in the fuel. Then they ship it to the reactors. So you can see the transportation of these materials is very common. France has also reprocessed fuel for a number of European customers and Japan. So, but anyway, the anti-nuclear establishment will show up on your doorstep and say, you don't want this facility here. The transportation is going to end up killing everybody along the routes and all sorts of other hyperbole, which is not only not true, but has been disproven by so much experience all over the world. So the innovation that we're doing, you can see here, I mentioned the Holtec test. You see a cask that has a solar collector. I mentioned they have no moving parts, these casks. Why would we need a solar power? It's, by the way, the world's only solar powered nuclear waste container. And that's just because it was too complicated to run electricity to the storage pad. This is in Virginia near the North Anna reactor. It's where North Anna stores its fuel. This is a special cask. We put the most challenging population of fuel, meaning the fuel, we call it high burnup fuel, but again, I think it's already established nuclear engineers aren't the best communicators. We invent these terms that scare people. What it is the fuel that had produced the most fissions and thereby had the most radioactive products in it and produced the most heat. We loaded that with the most challenging population of fuel we could. The reason it has solar collectors is it's being monitored by thermocouples to monitor its temperatures. What we found out is the temperatures, even with that challenging high burn-up fuel, don't get nearly as high as we thought they did because our models are very conservative. Everything we do in the nuclear industry is super conservative. Oh, by the way, you're one slide behind. I'm sorry. You're not seeing, you're 2 slides behind. Oh dear, I've been looking at my computer and not at the little screen up here. Yeah, innovation, next. Next slide. Yes, there you see the world's only solar powered nuclear waste container in the upper right. And we're going to ship that container to Idaho National Lab, where it's going to be opened, and they're going to do all kinds of examination on the fuel to verify its integrity. We did that once before around 2000 with a population of fuel that didn't have quite as many fissions, and so now we're continuing as fuel types evolve, our science evolves. This is all about innovation. The innovation works because you see there, and this will occur a couple times, when the California Coastal Commission had to approve the decommissioning of the San Onofre nuclear station, which is a shut down nuclear plant. They had to agree that the dry storage would be good for the long term because there's still no U.S. repository, and without the plant there anymore, there's no way to go back into the pool. So we demonstrated that we could repair these systems as they sit, sending small robots inside the outer concrete shells if we ever detected any damage to the confinement barriers inside. We haven't, again, and we've loaded 4,300 of these all the way back to 1986. But again, that's not how we do things in the nuclear industry. We design them to be robust. We inspect them to make sure they are being robust. And then if we were to detect some corrosion or whatever, we demonstrate that we can repair them right where they are. And the California Coastal Commission approved, and that was a tough audience. As you can imagine, those people were not fond of what we do. And they approved 10-0 the decommissioning of the plant based on the demonstration of the technology that we could use to repair the canisters. There you see these same things again. And I won't dwell on this, but this is a key part of the innovation. Again, first of all, we weren't thinking we'd load anything like this. Then we didn't think we'd have them for very long because Yucca Mountain, and I'll get to that in a second, was going to be the permanent repository like Sweden and Finland have theirs. And then we realized, well, no, these have to be good for the long term. So we've done a lot of science and put in place learning aging management programs. This is kind of the philosophy of learning aging management, is that we're constantly building feedback into this. And this would be true, somebody asked the question of how long until you close the geologic repository, and that's really a choice. And the choice is based on this very sort of thing here, which is, how long do you want to continue to look at how things are aging in the repository? How long do you want to continue to monitor? How long do you want to be incorporating this feedback into improving things and maybe putting in place additional barriers or changing things even if you wanted to? Swedish design, very hard to change, but they still will have a monitoring period. So, and these are the kind of things that in Yucca Mountain were dictated by federal regulations. in any successful repository, these sorts of learning, aging management things, these decisions on how long until you close the facility, how much material to put in a given facility, those would all be made in partnership with the states and the communities, and to the extent applicable, the tribes. In fact, the Canadians have just identified and approved their repository site. And you know, they did a wonderful thing with it's on tribal land in Ignace, Ontario. They didn't send out a bunch of scientists who spoke in languages that the tribal leaders wouldn't understand to tell them why it would be safe. They approached the tribe with this, well, you guys have been concerned about protecting Mother Earth for many generations. How would you go about this? That led them to do this thing they call combining indigenous knowledge with scientific knowledge. And therefore, they built support. Again, as Elena said, you have to meet people where they are when you communicate. And us engineers and scientists just haven't been very good at that. You know, another way to illustrate this learn as you go aging management approach is this, you know, you used to get to a toll road. I don't think you have many of those in North Dakota, but you know, you throw change out the window and hope you hit the basket. Well, now you just drive along at whatever the speed limit is, and your toll is paid by your credit card. That's how, you know, the management of these materials over the long terms will be. Technology will continue to advance. This is not an excuse for delaying the repository. We do need to start to put at least the materials that can't be recycled for more energy into the ground. That is fundamental to gain support for more nuclear energy. But we can continue to apply ever more advanced technologies and innovations as we do that. I mentioned the 2 consolidated interim storage facility. This is an out-of-date slide. They're currently stalled. The DOE, if they were here to talk to you, would talk about their efforts to use a consent-based siting approach, now referred to a collaborative siting. The old administration called it consent-based. This administration calls it collaborative, working in partnership with the states and the communities and the tribes, because consent-based kind of sounds like you're being asked to do something you shouldn't ought to want to do. Collaboration, it sounds like a partnership. It sounds like that the states and the localities have a role in deciding not only what the facility is, but how it should be regulated. Again, that's how it's working in the rest of the world. I'll have a slide on that in a second. Here's something that I'm sure the Department of Energy would have showed you a lot more about what they're doing. They have universities and others working on the best ways to communicate these facilities. And they do expect that when they put out an expression, a request for expression for interest, that they will get a community saying, yeah, we're interested in learning more. Not, hey, we volunteered to site the facility, but we're interested in learning more, and then a collaboration would begin from there. Of course, that's moving at the speed of the government right now, and who knows what that is. Recycling, I know you've already asked questions about that. A lot of advanced reactors. I'm looking at my computer and I'm not looking at the screen. I'm terribly sorry. Can you keep going through the slides till I get to the recycling slide? Yeah, there's the toll gates, and there's the interim storage facilities. Yeah, go forward. Go forward again. That's the consortium recycling. Go one more. You see, I have my contacts in because I was driving, and without my reading glasses, I can't see the tiny one on my phone. So I'm looking at a bigger one over here. Sorry about that. So yeah, a lot of advanced reactors either operate on are designed to operate on recycled fuels, or need recycling to get the kinds of fuels they like. You know, right now, the fuels I showed you, they have about up to 5%. Now we're increasing to that 6 or 7%, what we call enrichment, which is the amount of U-235 as a percentage. That's the easy to split version of uranium, versus the rest of all the uranium in there, which is primarily U-238. They need up to 20% in some of these designs. Getting to there is easier to do if you recycle used fuel than if you start from fresh uranium, where the percentage of U-235 is, you know, down under 1.3%, I think is my recollection. Also, with the recycling, you can fission plutonium, as has been mentioned, and you can fission some of the other things at the far end of the periodic table, since it's americium and curium, and a lot of things that don't exist in nature but do exist in used fuel. Again, have to be stored for 100,000 years or more, or permanently disposed of in facilities. NEI's recycling principles, and the letter to the secretary I sent you has links to both our recycling principles and our overall used fuel principles. Principle one is it doesn't obviate the need for disposal. The French do have numbers because the French have a real repository program and they have an operating recycling facility. By the way, I've used reprocessing and recycling. You know, I'm not quite the communicator Elena is, I will admit that. Reprocessing is extracting reusable materials from the fuel. Recycling is putting those back in the fuel and getting energy or some other benefit, such as a medical radioisotope, out of them. So recycling is a much more complete thing than reprocessing. The reason the term reprocessing became a term was because that's how we got the plutonium for the weapons. That was not recycling. That was producing weapons. Recycling is putting it back in reactors and other beneficial uses. Anyway, you still need disposal, but you see in bullets 2 through, go ahead, keep moving ahead. There, yeah, that one. So these are our recycling principles. 2 through 4 on this are the reasons that I just spoke about why the nuclear industry supports recycling, why this administration sees it as an imperative. There is, and this is bipartisan, R&D on recycling. There is also a lot of innovation going on in, Jimmy Carter was scared people would use it to make nuclear weapons, so he kind of wanted to put the technology to bed. But there's a lot of technology going into how you can detect, how you can make the process, if you will, more proliferation resistant. Sorry. Apparently my air conditioner in the car was running on battery power, and now the battery doesn't want to do that anymore, which means I won't be talking much longer. Regulatory framework for recycling, again, NRC is, if we can go to ultimate disposal, the next slide. This is really it in a nutshell, why it's not that hard. What you're doing when you put these 100,000-year radioactive things deep underground is you're isolating them from the accessible environment for long enough that the humans above never see them. It's really a race between two processes that are very well known, radioactive decay processes. As radiation is given off by a material that's radioactive, it becomes less radioactive until it's not radioactive. Geologic processes, we have explored the geologic record going back billions of years. The Swedish repository, as was mentioned, is in 2 billion year old rock. So what this means is, had the dinosaurs had nuclear power, and had they developed a geologic repository just like the one in Sweden, all of that would not be radioactive by the time humans came along. So it really is a very simple. If we can go on to the next slide. This is the turgid history of Yucca Mountain. I will not go over it. It's an example of what Elena said, a failure to communicate. I attended, my role in this was as a representative of industry. We were the customers of the facility. I was trying to do everything I could to help our supplier be successful. Every time a challenge was identified, they did more and more engineering. And every time they did more and more engineering, it got more and more complicated, and they didn't communicate it well. And what they did communicate was that, wow, with all this extra engineering they keep throwing at it, maybe that mountain isn't a real safe place to dispose of it. That's really the only thing the public got out of $10 billion of science at Yucca Mountain. As you mentioned, the Swedes will not spend nearly that much on their repository. The secret here is the more you rely on the geology, which is really why you're putting it deep underground, the less you have to rely on engineered barriers. Somebody questioned copper containers. That's also a choice. It's a choice dependent on how much are you going to rely on the containers versus the geology. What materials work best in different geologies. In Yucca Mountain, they used something called nickel. It was called alloy 22. It was a nickel chromium molybdenum alloy, and then they put titanium drip shields over that. don't think those drip shields ever would have been necessary because Yucca Mountain was very dry. But again, they were over-sciencing things to the point of scaring people about, well, why are you putting it here then? Go on to the next slide. There is research and development. There's 4 different types of geologies, the type that Yucca Mountain was in, as well as the clays and the granites, which is what the Scandinavians are doing. The French are doing the clays. Salt has been considered as well, although that's more difficult. There is actually a repository for low-lived, long-level waste in the United States. It's the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico. That's why New Mexico keeps coming up, because they already have something with relating to nuclear disposal there. But you know, again, that's for very low levels. It's working in a salt mine with something that needs to be, or at least habitually has been, as clean as used nuclear fuel. That's tricky. Not to say it can't be done, but I kind of personally prefer some of the other geologies. You also see on the screen deep borehole disposal. This is using, and I know in North Dakota you have a lot of experience with directional drilling for oil and gas exploration. Using directional drilling technology to go even deeper. You know, geologic disposal is 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet underground. Deep boreholes, you go a kilometer or 2 or more underground from a single wellhead. And I'm actually here in Texas. I was on vacation, but there's not far from where I sit, maybe about 100 miles away, there's a test and training oil rig that has been used to demonstrate putting simulated waste packages, nuclear waste. They've not put anything radioactive in there. That would ruin the point of the test and training rig that the oil industry relies on. So this technology is coming along. That's putting it even deeper in the ground. And because you have directional drilling technologies, you know, from a single wellhead, you can go in a lot of different directions. You don't have to drill, you know, and you don't have to put the fuel on top of it. So if you had to retrieve it or you wanted to retrieve it for recycling, it might be hard, but it becomes less hard. Going on to the next slide. This is another, the company that you might want to reach out to, Deep Isolation, is they're the ones doing the demonstrations down here in Texas that I mentioned. And they, you know, would be happy to talk to you about, you know, disposing. What this is you can actually have a reactor that disposes of its own waste right on site. Now, would somebody want that? That is a much greater communication challenge from a siting perspective, but you know, you wouldn't have to worry about the cost of transporting it. And by the way, speaking of cost, Alina did a good job of explaining in Sweden that the utilities are charged a fee which pays for the disposal. In the United States, we have the same thing. It's called the Nuclear Waste Fund. There is $50 billion in that fund. Getting Congress to appropriate that fund, that's a whole nother talk. I won't go into that. But yes, the up till 2014, the reactor operators paid $1 per kilowatt hour. The electric ratepayers, essentially, towards the U.S. disposal program. That fund, the DOE puts out an accounting of it every year, and that fund is now up to, with interest earned, it earns $1.5 billion a year, and interest is up to $50 billion. But again, getting Congress to actually give the money back, because Congress did count it in its balanced, but they counted the receipts in balanced budget math. That's the trick. This is the I call this my slide of shame. As you can see here, the United States is the only country that's red in the repository column. Every one of these countries, thank you for moving to the next slide. Every one of these countries, and you see where Sweden is and some of the others, is making progress on a repository. Again, we feel our storage technologies are good for a long time. But as we continue to grow the industry, and most of these countries wouldn't have been green 5-10 years ago, they realized we want to expand nuclear energy. Sweden was going to shut it down, but now they've gone from we're phasing out nuclear energy to we better expand it because we need that. You know, it was all driven by, if we're going to expand nuclear energy, we should move towards permanent disposal. Again, I won't go over the details, but now you have the full international picture. This isn't a dark art that nobody has experience with. This is happening all around the world. Go to the next slide. I talked about future decisions, and go to the next slide. This is really what what has changed. When we were trying to push Yucca Mountain over the finish line, it was hard because there were a lot of very smart, good communicator people on the other side pushing in the other direction. But now you're pushing and you're pulling. And it was hard for us to push too because storage was just so easy for us. Why go out of our way to build something as challenging as a geologic repository when we can store the stuff for 100 years on site, and that's beyond the career horizon of any nuclear industry executive. But now the solution is getting pushed and pulled because more people want more nuclear energy. So hopefully that works. Go to the next slide. Again, you'll see in that letter links to both our recycling principles and our used fuel principles. With all due respect to the folks from the government who would have been with you today, the fact that they're not with you says something. Sweden, Canada, Finland, Switzerland, almost everybody who's succeeding, there's an organization outside the government that has custody of the fund that has been paid, that can use it for its intended purpose. The fact that the government is only as good as next year's appropriations, sometimes, as is the case now. Next year's appropriations gets hung up. And I'm a lifelong registered independent, so I will cast no blame. But it's a reason why not only that the government, well, the people that would have been with you are actually very good communicators. The government is learning its lesson there, but it's still going to be hard to trust a government-run project when every promise the government makes may or may not get funded next year, and its leadership may or may not change with every election. We would envision some sort of a new organization that would make good on the promises that the ratepayers were made when they paid into the Nuclear Waste Fund. The most important bullet on this slide is the collaborative siting process. Anybody who's interested in a used fuel facility or a nuclear facility that comes with used fuel infrastructure, I mean, you should be interested in energy, you should be interested in recycling, and you should be interested in the economic opportunity that comes with the used fuel piece, because the easiest thing to do in nuclear is to build one of these dry storage facilities. It's a concrete pad, the cap.
His battery might have died.
I think he was down to his last 2 or 3 slides. We'll see if he calls back in. Give it a couple of minutes here. Wondering if his vehicle won't start. No.
That was the impression. It was his vehicle battery. So I was kind of confused. His phone must be charging into it.
Oh. Well, apparently Representative Nelson does not have one of those issues. He's with us all the way here. Yeah. Okay.
I have a fuel vehicle,
Ah.
and I'm charging as we speak.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, I think we'll just keep moving on here. We will break for lunch and then come back at 12:30. For those of you who are online, we will begin at 12:30 sharp. So we got about 35 minutes here.
Will you mail us our box lunch? Just wondering.
Yes, it'll be in your email.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, so, okay, we are in recess until 12:30. We're back live and we will reconvene our high-level radioactive waste advisory council meeting. Rod got his phone overheated, so he got shut down for just at the tail end of his presentation. So we'll go back to Rod and let him finish up. If we can pull up his slide deck.
Oh yeah, you don't have to pull up the slide deck. I was pretty much at the end of the slides. I think I would just emphasize that the United States is at the beginning of starting a journey towards geologic disposal. We're certainly very interested. This country will deploy advanced recycling technologies because some of these new reactors will need those for fuel supply reasons. And I think the most important thing in the whole presentation, if you get a chance to review it, is the bit about collaborative siting. And the idea that any of these types of facilities could only be developed, as they have been in some of these other countries, as partnerships with states and communities, and you know, in some cases even used fuel facilities such as disposal with directional drilling technology can be coupled with reactor projects, so that you can dispose deep below the facility that generates the waste. The nuclear industry has done a great job of containing its waste. We still have all of our waste, and we'll continue to do a great job containing it until we get to that point of geologic disposal. What I'd want to do is, again, commend you for considering the issue, for having such a council, and if there are any questions, because I can't imagine I explained everything I should have.
Any questions from committee members? Ed.
Rod, Ed Murphy, again, as I did with Elena, I'd like to thank you very much for jumping on and giving this great talk, again, on short notice and on your vacation. So really appreciate that. Well, we're aware that Yucca Mountain was tabled, was not denied. Do you have any hope at all that could start back up again, the process?
Not under the current framework, meaning the Nuclear Waste Policy Act as it exists today, with the set of parameters where essentially Congress overrode the veto of the governor of Nevada. But if you established as in that list of used fuel principles, and you'll see it outlined in the letter, I would encourage you all to read the letter, and I'd be happy to follow up if that engenders more questions. If you established a new organization, it was capable, it was more durable than, an appropriation to appropriation DOE approved to be. I think if that organization embraced some of the communications techniques that you heard from Elena, I think you could go back to Nevada and you could say, can we start over with a clean slate here? I would, the industry would not support legislation that categorically takes Yucca Mountain off the table, because then every other state might say, well, why only Nevada? The road back to Yucca Mountain would not be through the existing process, and a new process would require legislation, which is why we wrote that letter to the Secretary of Energy, because the president has directed the Secretary of Energy to come up with a legislative proposal.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Rod, I do want to express a little disappointment that you chose to vacation in Texas instead of North Dakota. You could have been here and then presented in person, but and by the way, pheasant season is open here in North Dakota, and there's a lot of birds out there. So, just to get you a heads up on that. Yeah,
I'll take that under full advisement. And the only reason I'm vacationing in Texas is I'm a big Formula One fan, and the U.S. Grand Prix was down here this weekend. So
okay, yeah, we don't have that up here, although my daughter thinks that we do. Anyway, any other questions for
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is John. Rod, I have a question about, there's been some discussion about the small nuclear reactors in our area to support some of the industries that are coming to the state. In fact, in some of the Canadian provinces, there's some talk about that in their development as well. I'm curious, is there a distinction in the disposal or the reuse the waste in those small nuclear reactors?
Yes, some of the
operations?
small yes, there's about a dozen different types, and then in each type of reactor, there's many companies competing to be first to sell one. Some of those reactors actually run off of recycled waste. A molten salt reactor, if you hear about those, they're considering those in New Brunswick in Canada, as well as other places in the world. Those actually run off of the waste stream of a recycling facility. Then you have designs like Oklo that just opened that just broke ground on a recycling center. It hopes to get licensed and built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It has a metal fuel sodium cooled design that also runs on recycled fuel, and they also intend to recycle their own fuel. The bottom line, though, and I could go on and on. There's TRISO fueled, gas cooled reactors. There's a lot of things, and it's a choice. What engineering suits best your location? Some of these are micro reactors that if you have a remote site, the military is very interested in those, because if the military has remote bases, powering a base with a very small reactor makes sense to them. But the bottom line is every atom you split produces the same long-lived radioactive byproducts that Elena so aptly spoke about. And so they just come out in different forms. What some of these small reactors do, for example, TRISO fuel and the gas-cooled small reactors, that's a very even more robust fuel form than the ones I described to you. And it can be put into a package that can more easily go down one of these directional drill holes. So this is why you guys are being so smart in thinking about disposal. I'm sure North Dakota is interested in more energy, and you should be thinking about what type of reactor you would want to generate that energy. And the small reactors offer many choices. And yes, they do produce the same amount of radioactive byproducts, but in different forms. And the disposability of those different forms is absolutely something you should consider. I hope that answers the question.
Any further questions from any? Merrick, go ahead. Yep.
So I had a question. Are there any news on any boreholes happening anywhere else in the United States right now?
Right now, the next step is what's called a full-scale cold demonstration. I believe Deep Isolation has plans to do that. They've done some smaller scale demonstrations that might occur not far from where I'm at in Texas right now. Then the question of when they would actually dispose of radioactive waste, probably in Europe first. They have a number of European customers. Developing a facility the scope of Yucca Mountain is easy for the United States when you're the richest economy in the world. And then we over-designed it and made it way too expensive on top of that. But I think that the boreholes, you'll see some more demonstration in the United States. I think you'll see them actually start to go in combination with advanced reactor projects in Europe, where a country may only want to have one nuclear site. Finland has a 3 conventional reactor site on which it also has its repository on the same site there. So I would encourage you to contact Deep Isolation. I can give you contact information for the Deep Isolation folks if you want to learn more about what might be happening with boreholes.
That would be nice.
Yeah, I'll send that to Ed. I'll do an introduction of my contact at Deep Isolation.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Rod? Ian, did you have any questions? Okay.
Well,
Why
thank
don't
you for
come to a microphone.
Sorry, I can't see the room.
Push them.
I always get caught on that one.
You don't
Can
need
hear
to
me
hold
now?
it. You don't need to hold it down, but yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about what you think it should look like for the organization that would get the appropriation? Do you think that would continue to be the national labs? Would that be a different private company, a nonprofit?
I think it would, in my view, and it's yet to be seen what we will create here, but you'll see some outlines of it in our letter. It would be a private corporation accountable to the government. It would have a board of directors that certainly would include the utilities that paid into the waste fund or would pay into the waste fund in the future, would include the state and local governments. That if there were affected tribes, it might include them. The key would be getting the board of directors of this private entity and holding it accountable to get the job done. That's not hard because that's exactly what the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada. And you guys aren't too far from Ignace, Ontario. You might want to talk to people. I can also give you a contact at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Ontario. And that is a non-government entity. It has 4 shareholders, the 3 Canadian nuclear power companies and the Canadian National Nuclear Laboratory. So it is run as a private corporation, but it is authorized by the Canadian government. Its decision to move forward with the repository had to be approved by the Canadian government, its process. So what you need is a private company with a lot of government accountability, and you get away from appropriations. We need to figure out a structure where this entity can have access to that $50 billion in the nuclear waste fund without having to rely on annual appropriations. Because as we're seeing right now, by the fact that government is not here, is that that's not a process you can rely on. And this is a very long-term project.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Rod? Seeing none, thank you so much, Rod. Enjoy your vacation, and I hope your driver wins.
Well, the race was last weekend. I'm on my way home. This is just basically, my wife is shopping while I'm doing this, and then we're going to the airport. So you
want to get done with this as soon as you possibly can.
Yes, yes. And thank you all for the opportunity, and I'd be happy for any follow-up.
You bet. Thanks a lot for the presentation and the follow-up. Okay, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Welcome, David Stradinger with the DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. And I'll let you introduce yourself and then just dive in.
Hey,
and
you.
Your boss is watching closely.
He said he's grading me on this.
Okay.
Better do well. So, Chairman Patton, members of the council, want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present to you today. I know we've had this presentation in the past. It's been several years. Some of it may be a little bit repetitive, but we'll try to keep it as fresh as we can. Are you able to hear me okay, or sneak it up on me here? Okay. All right. But like I say, my name is Dave Stradinger. I'm the manager of the Radiation and Indoor Air Quality Control Program with the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. Here today to talk a little bit about radioactive waste, kind of provide a little bit of an overview on high-level radioactive waste, going down in through some of the transuranic wastes into low-level radioactive waste, and also provide a little information on TNORM, technologically enhanced natural occurring radioactive material waste as well. Kind of starting high, working our way low. I guess I'm just going to take a little side note here, just to kind of give a little bit of a kind of a basic radiation 101. I think it'd be good to kind of go over this before we start. We're dealing with radioactive material, and that's our main concern because there's radiation involved. And I think it's good to kind of go back to the basics and understand the type of radiation that we're dealing with. We've got 4 basic types of radiation we're dealing with. We're dealing with alpha and beta particles. We're dealing with gamma rays and neutrons. And just getting a basic understanding on those, because I think it's kind of helpful as you go through the program and we talk about the different shielding characteristics and things like that are involved in transportation of these materials. Starting off with the alpha particles, they're very large, they're very heavy. They don't travel very far, only a matter of inches in air. So they're shielded very easily. A sheet of paper will actually shield an alpha particle, as well as even a dead layer of skin on our bodies will shield a lot of alpha particles. So they're not very much of an external radiation concern, but more on the internal side if it's ingested, inhaled, going through a cut in the skin, things like that. But from a external side of things, it's really not much of a concern. Beta particles, they travel several feet. They kind of travel at haphazard directions, and they're a little bit more penetrating, but they can be shielded with just thin layers of plastic, acrylics, things like that. So they're somewhat of an external concern, but not to the degree that you would when you get into the realm of gamma rays, which are much more penetrating. And those are the ones where you really need some dense material to shield and protect yourself from it. And that's where you're talking about several inches of lead shielding, tungsten, different materials such as that will shield the gamma rays. Kind of a thing to think about in radiation in general is radiation travels in straight lines. So it's not going to bounce around corners or anything like that. So you think about the directional aspect of things as well. Then you get into the neutrons, some of the, there's going to be neutrons produced in these power plants when we're talking about the high level types of materials. Neutrons do travel a fair amount of a distance as well, and they will be shielded with things like concrete or things that have a lot of water content in them. And you'll see, we've heard before in some of the other talks that the spent nuclear fuel goes into the pools for a while, and that water is actually shielding the neutrons from reaching the surface. So just kind of a basic radiation 101 before we go into the waste side of things itself. Say, kind of begin with the two broad classifications of waste. You've got the high level waste and you've got the low level waste. Go next. The high level radioactive waste primarily is uranium fuel that has been used in a nuclear power reactor or power plant and is spent or no longer efficient in producing electricity. Spent fuel is thermally hot as well as highly radioactive and requires remote handling and shielding. During the fission process, the reactor's radioactive isotopes of lighter elements such as cesium-137 and strontium-90 are produced. These are the isotopes or fission products that account for most of the heat and the penetrating radiation in the high level waste. Some of the uranium atoms capture neutrons during the process, forming heavier elements. These are heavier than uranium, or what they call transuranic elements, and they do not produce near as much heat or penetrating radiation, but they do take much longer to decay. And I see that the higher the activity, the shorter the decay time. So as such, the transuranic wastes, or TRU, as you'll see termed several places, account for most of the radioactive hazard remaining in high level waste, after 1,000 years. The transuranic waste generally consists of things like protective clothing, tools, and equipment that are used in the power plants in the normal day-to-day operations. Next. So in nuclear fission, atoms are split apart, which releases energy. Current nuclear power plants use nuclear fission, and most nuclear power plants use uranium atoms. During the nuclear fission, a neutron collides with a uranium atom and splits it, which releases a large amount of energy in the form of heat and radiation. So more neutrons are actually produced as the uranium atom splits as well. And so these neutrons continue to interact with other uranium atoms, and it keeps on going and keeps on going. And that's what repeats itself over and over again. And that's what, when we hear about a nuclear chain reaction, that's what we're dealing with, this ongoing colliding of the neutrons with the uranium atoms. So the reaction's controlled in nuclear power plants to produce a desired amount of heat and electricity. So they have different ways of controlling how much heat is produced, and thus how much steam is produced, how much electricity on that back end. So next. So high level radioactive waste. Here we've got a depiction of a nuclear fuel assembly. We've kind of seen some of those pictures. Nuclear fuel consists of ceramic pellets of uranium-235s stacked inside of metal rods. And then the single pellet in a typical reactor yields about the same amount of energy as 1 ton of steaming coal. Well, these pellets are, I've got an example one here I just passed around here. Yes, it is appropriately shielded. But you know, they're about 1 centimeter in diameter by 1.5 centimeters in length. There's not much there, right? You know,
And you said that's the equivalent of a ton of coal?
Yes, the energy produced from that pellet is the same as a ton of coal. So you've got these pellets in these rods, and the rods are bound together to form the fuel assembly, which you kind of see the picture of the multiple rods tied together, and that would be considered the fuel assembly itself. And when you look at the picture on the lower right, you can see how tall those are, you know, compared to an average human. So the typical number of fuel rods per assembly varies by reactor's design and can be between 49 to over 300 rods per assembly. The number of assemblies in the reactor core and the frequency of loading and discharging assemblies in and out of the reactor depends on the reactor type and the power production. For an example, an 1100 megawatt electric pressurized water reactor may contain 193 fuel assemblies composed of over 50,000 fuel rods and some 18 million fuel pellets. So it's a lot of those little pellets. Before the fuel rods are used, they're only slightly radioactive and can be handled without special shielding. Now the fuel rods, when they're first loaded and delivered to a power plant, they haven't undergone that initial reaction where you have a neutron interacting with the uranium atom. So at this point, the radioactivity is very minimal and they're not much of a concern. Versus on the backside, after they've been used and activated, and that radiation, that activity builds up over time. Next. Now, in addition to nuclear power plants, the United States Navy is another source of spent nuclear fuel. When ships' power reactors are refueled or defueled, the spent nuclear fuel needs to be transported to the Naval Reactors Facility at Idaho National Laboratories. And at that point is when they undergo an inspection to make sure that there aren't any damage to the materials or anything like that. Since 1957, the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program has completed almost 1,100 shipments of spent nuclear fuel from various ports. So one of the big differences with the naval nuclear fuel, it's in a solid metal form. It's not flammable and it's designed to withstand intense battle shock. A little bit different than what they have in the nuclear power plant situations. So next. So some of the concerns we want to look at with high level waste is that there's a potential for high radiation exposures, heat generation, and some of the storage options. Now, we've talked about the Yucca Mountain plant. I think we've probably talked enough about that, understanding that we had a permanent disposal option that they were looking at and has since been discontinued. So they had looked into the possibility of having some interim storage sites for this spent fuel. But, there's been some current work on some of that, but it continues to be met with some pushback. They had proposed interim storage sites were located in southeastern New Mexico, now is Holtec International, and also in western Texas through interim storage partners. I think we heard in one of the previous talks, but recently Holtec International, they confirmed that it's canceling plans to build their consolidated interim storage facility in New Mexico. Named the High Store CISF, that facility would have stored up to 10,000 canisters of commercial spent nuclear fuel on land owned by the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance near the towns of Carlsbad and Hobbs. So there was a potential for a lot of material to be stored at this interim facility, but as of now, they've taken that back. So next. So currently, all the United States nuclear power plants store their spent nuclear fuel on-site in spent fuel pools, such as what you see on the left. And you'll see that eventually these will be transferred into dry storage. I think we've had some talk about that already in the previous presentations. So the pools are made of reinforced concrete, several feet thick with steel liners. We kind of talked earlier how neutrons are shielded by concrete. Thus, we've got these thick concrete in the construction of these pools. Water is typically about 40 feet deep and serves both to shield and cool the fuel rods. As the pool's near capacity, some of the older spent fuel is then moved into the dry storage. And you may notice a blue glow in the pool here. That's due to what they call shrink-off radiation. Shrink-off radiation is a form of energy that we can perceive as a blue glow emitted when the electrically charged particles that compose the atoms, the electrons and protons, are moving at speeds faster than that of light in a specific medium. So they're going faster than the speed of light, and thus they're producing this blue glow. You can kind of think of it as kind of like similar to a sonic boom when people are, planes are going faster than the speed of sound, you hear the sonic boom. This is a similar kind of thing as these particles are moving faster than the speed of light. It's kind of cool to see. That's why everybody wants to go tour one. So next. And then, like it was mentioned, these materials are then taken out of the pools when they've cooled down enough, and then they're put into the dry storage. You can see one of the pictures on the right looks like the exact same picture that was in the last presentation, but you have some different configurations of dry storage. You can have vertical storage or horizontal storage. So the spent nuclear fuel is placed into the casks, and those are placed inside these vaults. And then if and when there would be an option for interim or final disposal, the cask would then be removed from the vaults and transported in approved shipping containers to their destination. Next. So transportation of the high level radioactive waste creates many challenges. Adequate and available shipping containers, which also need to meet strict requirements for approval. Security of the material during the shipment, and routing concerns. You can see that geometry of some of the new fuel types also presents another challenge. There's a depiction of what they call triso fuel. I think it was mentioned in previously as well. This is one of the new fuel types. And when you think of the geometry, the different geometry compared to that pellet that you see going around, it presents other challenges for creating different transport casks, storage casks, and things like that due to the geometry of it. And what this is you can see that each particle contains a fuel kernel, which is uranium, carbon, and oxygen, surrounded by 4 layers of pyrolytic carbon and silicon carbide. So basically, it's almost self-shielding itself. So you've got those considerations to look into when you're thinking about different types of transportation, canisters, things like that. Yeah. So those are some of the other challenges that that come up when you look into the transportation of these types of wastes. So. Now, like we talked about some of the routing concerns. As we've heard, communication is one of the key elements when it comes to transportation, especially with routing. You're going to go through probably multiple states, multiple jurisdictions. You've got tribal lands to be concerned about as well. And make sure that you're communicating. And one of the keys to communicating is that you're communicating well enough in advance. That it's not a last minute thing that people hear about. We recently at one of our meetings heard about some material that was in one of the Northeast states, some waste material that was going to be transported down to another state. And this had been going on for quite some time, but this particular shipment got the attention of one of the legislators in the district of where this material was going to end up. And they weren't aware of these shipments. So just keeping that in mind, that's where the communication piece really becomes important. Other things to think about is the mode of transportation. It's going to go by highway, it's going to go by rail, by waterway, that kind of a thing. You look at on the land side of things, what are the conditions? The conditions of railways. A lot of power plants, when they're first constructed, they had a railway set up to where they could bring the initial fuel in. But now they've been operating for quite some time. So some of these rail spurs have been taken out, or maybe they haven't been kept up to speed. Same with the highways. You think about highways, bridges, communities, construction, all these kind of things that you need to think about when you're looking at routing and shipping some of these materials. The different population centers that you may be passing through. And another important piece is the emergency response capabilities. If something would happen, are the capabilities there to help take care of that situation? There are some computer programs that are available now for pre-assessment. One is, it goes by the acronym Cassandra. This is a tool that can inform and aid communication strategies with the local population to help curtail panic, concern, outrage, things like that, and build up public trust. The program analyzes 31 different characteristics of a community, weights those characteristics, and produces a numeric score that helps assist the community as it begins to hammer out its readiness plans for future shipment campaigns. The score reflects an analysis of the community rather than an assessment of the first responders and their readiness. So, that's the direction that they look at. They want to see, looking at the community itself, not whether or not the quality of first responders, things like that. So Cassandra points out to where the vulnerabilities are, which means a little bit of work in those areas in anticipation of a possible future shipping campaign will likely pay off large dividends if the shipments do come through that area. Another tool is a stakeholder tool for assessing radioactive transportation. Notice START. This has been around for a little while. It's a Department of Energy web-based geospatial decision support tool for evaluating routes for transporting spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. So it uses geographical information, the GIS technology to analyze various transportation modes and routes, considering factors like population density, again, emergency response capabilities in environmentally sensitive areas. So the START, it helps stakeholders visualize the route options, understanding the implications of different choices. There might be a better choice looking at going one way or the other way. They can make that informed decision. And it helps support planning activities for transportation logistics, emergency preparedness, and infrastructure assessments. The Council of State Governments, or Midwest office, and the Midwestern Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee, they publish the planning guide for shipments of radioactive material through the Midwest states. That's something that's available publicly, and that's something that we're currently working on the updates to at this point, with that being on that committee. So that's another tool that it kind of helps explain some of the things, the best practices that you would want to look into when you're planning a transportation project, things like that. And it's got a lot of the contact information for all the Midwestern states, and a lot of other information in there that would be helpful when planning a transportation of some of this waste to the Midwestern areas. So, here you kind of see an example of one of the M90 shipping container. Just when you talked about the size of some of these containers, you can see how big that is. They've got another one that was just approved, the Atlas container. They're looking at continuously to improve these, and in preparation of if and when we are able to transport some of these spent nuclear fuel assemblies. So this is, some of the work that these different commissions and committees continue to work on, looking at things that in the future. So we're planning ahead of time. So when the time comes, we'll be ready and we'll have the tools to do it safely. So these shipping containers, they go through extensive testing. There's drop tests, impact tests, submersion tests. They're exposed to fire, penetration tests and all this before they actually get approved for transport. When we talked in transporting spent nuclear fuel, we talked about the security aspects of it. What you'll see in a typical situation is you'll have the locomotives to start with, and then you'll have maybe some buffer cars. You'll have the car with the spent cask on it with the shipping container, and then be followed up by what's shown here on the right side. That's actually looks like the old cabooses, but what it is, that's actually the security car. So that's where all the security personnel would be. So they would be with the shipment at all times. So keeping everything secure. Next, we talked about some of the other wastes that are produced as far as operation of a nuclear power plant, the transuranic wastes. We talked about, there is currently a geological repository for these wastes, and that's the Waste Isolation Power Plant, or WIP, down in Andrews, Texas. And it just shows some pictures of this. They're going down a couple thousand feet and down these salt caverns that they've tunneled out. And so these containers, when they come on site, they may be taken out of the transportation casks, and then they unload it out of that material, and then it goes down. They've got these huge elevators that will take the material down, and they'll put it in these different sections within these caverns that they have tunneled out. And then slowly over time, the salt will slowly encapsulate the containers over time. So it just kind of shows you upper right where where they're tunneling out one of the sections, and you can see down in the lower right some of the containers as they're offloaded from the shipping containers and taken downhole. So, we talked about, let's see, along with this, along with WIP, all of the, this is for Department of Energy waste. So this is stuff from defense related waste, and that's where the source of this material is. So this is a Department of Energy, basically a Department of Energy site. So only Department of Energy waste materials are going to this site. So the waste destined for WIP, it needs to be characterized using an EPA approved waste characterization program, and it's tracked from generation through disposal. The DOE has a waste data system which tracks each waste container from generation through characterization, storage, certification, shipment, and when it's emplaced at WIP. So they have a very good tracking system, cradle to grave, as they refer that to. So next. This is just an example of one of the shipping, the transportation containers that you would see with transuranic waste, where you can have similar to like 55-gallon drums of waste put together inside the shipping container. And then when, like I say, when that does come to the final destination, it's taken out of there, taken down, and placed in for final disposal. Next, as far as the transportation, the routes of transportation for transuranic waste, this kind of gives you a depiction of some of the normal routes that you'll see. And you'll notice that North Dakota is not involved on a normal basis. So since WIP's down to Texas and the materials coming from DOE sites, I guess we're lucky in that aspect that it's not going though. So it's just a typical waste. Next. So high-level radioactive waste is regulated by multiple authorities. The Department of Energy plans and carries out programs for safe handling of DOE-generated radioactive wastes. They develop waste disposal technologies and will design, construct, and operate the disposal facilities for DOE-generated and commercial high-level wastes. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission licenses and regulates the receipt and possessions of high-level radioactive waste at privately owned facilities and certain DOE facilities. Example would be an interim storage site. The EPA is also involved. They develop environmental standards and federal protection guidance for the offsite radiation due to disposal of the fuel and the high level and transuranic wastes. Then you've got the DOT as well. just as you would expect, that they regulate the packaging and carriage of all hazardous materials, including radioactive waste. The Department of Interior, through the U.S. Geological Survey, conducts laboratory and field geological investigations in support of DOE's waste disposal programs and collaborates with the DOE on earth science technical activities. I talked about the Council of State Governments Midwestern Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee. What that does is this brings together, it brings the Midwestern states together to identify, prioritize, and work with the U.S. Department of Energy to resolve regional issues related to the department's transport of radioactive waste and materials, including spent nuclear fuel. The committee comprises representatives of the executive and legislative branches of government in 12 of the Midwestern states, which include Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. This committee is the primary forum through which the Midwestern states have been and will continue to be involved in the planning for and preparation for the DOE shipments. Shifting down to the low-level waste, these are waste, basically all the waste that's not considered high-level radioactive waste. Typically consists of materials contaminated with radioactive material or exposed to neutrons. We talked about low-level waste. They include some materials that have been contaminated with materials, or they've become radioactive by exposure to neutrons. Similar to like a cyclotron facility where they're producing radioactive materials for maybe use in medicine, that kind of a thing. Over time, similar to what's going to happen in a nuclear power plant, the concrete, the metal in the wiring and such, as they're exposed to neutron radiation, these products become activated. They actually become radioactive themselves. I kind of relate that similar to where you take a piece of steel and rub it with a magnet. Now your piece of steel becomes magnetized. It's kind of a similar concept. Over time, it just becomes activated with the radiation. So examples of low-level waste include contaminated personal protective equipment, rags, mops, filters, residues, equipment tools, luminous dials, medical tubes, swabs, needles, syringes, laboratory specimens, things like that. The radioactivity from these wastes range from background levels found in nature to some higher levels, such as parts from inside of a nuclear reactor vessel. Low-level waste is typically stored at the licensee's or generator site, either until it's decayed away and can be disposed of as ordinary trash, or until they have enough amount for a shipment. Since shipping costs are so much, they'll wait until they have enough for shipment, and then they'll ship it for final disposal. Examples of low-level waste generators in the state of North Dakota would include our 2 universities. They do research using radioactive materials, so they end up with some of these wastes, as well as some of the major medical facilities that have nuclear medicine or radiation therapy capabilities. And we also have a cyclotron in the state as well. And we also have, when we talked about that activation products from things like a cyclotron, one of the universities used to house one of the cyclotrons in the state. And they since have removed the cyclotron, but they still have that vault, which is still considered radioactive because of the activation products. And they're currently working on taking care of that, disposing of it. So as far as there's 4 current active low-level waste disposal sites. We've got Energy Solutions, Barnwell operations located in Barnwell, South Carolina. They accept waste from the Atlantic Compact States, which are Connecticut, New Jersey, and South Carolina. Barnwell is licensed by the state of South Carolina to dispose of Class A, B, and C waste. Classification of low-level radioactive waste for near surface disposal is according to its radiological hazard. The classes include Class A, B, and C, with Class A being the least hazardous. continuing and accounting for 96% of the low-level waste. As the waste class and hazard increase, the regulations established by the NRC require progressively greater controls to protect the health and safety of the public and the environment. We have U.S. Ecology, located in Richland, Washington, accepts waste from the Northwest and Rocky Mountain compacts. Richland is licensed by the state of Washington to dispose of Class A, B, and Class C low-level waste. And we have Energy Solutions, Clive Operations in Clive, Utah, which accepts waste from all regions of the United States. And it's currently licensed by the state of Utah for Class A waste only. Waste Control Specialists, WCS, located near Andrews, Texas, accepts waste from the Texas compact generators and outside generators with permission from the compact. WCS is licensed by the state of Texas to dispose of Class A, B, and C waste. North Dakota is part of the Southwestern Low-Level Radioactive Waste Compact. So waste generators must petition the Southwestern Low-Level Radioactive Waste Compact for disposal of low-level radioactive waste. As the commission, the host state, California, does not have a current disposal site, the commission requires permission from the Texas Compact to dispose of waste from the Southwestern Compact into WCS. So generators that are looking to dispose of low-level waste in North Dakota, they need to petition the Southwestern Low-Level Radioactive Waste Commission to get the authority to ultimately dispose of their material in Texas. Someday, maybe never, California will have a disposal site, but wouldn't count on it anytime soon. Next. So the regulatory authorities, for this, we got the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality, the NRC, the DOT, and the DOE. And we kind of talked again about the Southwestern Low-Level Radioactive Waste Commission and their part in this as well. So they look at the Southwestern Compact. It's made up of the 4 states of North Dakota, South Dakota, California, and Arizona. I don't know how they picked putting us together with the Southwestern states, but that's how it ended up. So material that is being disposed of through those compacts goes through that commissions. Now we can move on to the next step, and that's talking about T-norm waste. Technologically enhanced natural occurring radioactive material, or T-norm waste, are predominantly generated by the oil and gas industry in North Dakota. I think a lot of us are fairly familiar with that or have heard about it in the news over time. Common examples of T-norm waste streams include production water, scale, sludge, and filter cake, filter socks, synthetic proppants, and contaminated soils and equipment. So when the existing concentrations of the natural occurring radioactive material or norm are changed, they're considered to be technologically enhanced and regulated. So when we look at some of these waste streams, you've got produced water, as the water is in the production side of the oil and gas industry. As that water is being used and circulated, it's going to bring up small particles of the strata of the soil. And so those are in suspension. So at this point, they're in suspension. They're still at their normal concentration that existed downhole. But after they've been processed, which we've got some facilities in North Dakota that processed these types of materials. And what they do is they run these materials through something like a centrifuge or a filter press, things like that. And now they've changed the concentration of material, and now it becomes technologically enhanced and regulated material. Another thing is scale. You've got scale that builds up in pipes over time. A lot of it in the natural gas side of things. But the scale, as it builds up over time, accumulates the natural occurring radioactive material. And over time, as the concentration is now changing and being increased, now it's subject to the T-norm regulations. Similar with sludge, filter cake. The sludge, you've got a lot of tanks out there in the oil field. The they're holding oil for a period of time. And over time, you get some of those solids that filter out of the oil, and they create kind of a sludge in the bottom. And over time, they'll need to take that out. And so they have like hydrovac trucks that'll come and remove that material, and they'll take it to a processing facility where they can still get some saleable, usable oil out of that sludge. But what's left behind is the technologically enhanced radioactive material, or the T-norm waste. And that has to be disposed of at a licensed facility. And the majority of that material is going out of state at this time. So next. As far as the regulatory authority in North Dakota, it's the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. T-norm or norm is not regulated by any federal entities. It's up to the states to take care of that themselves. North Dakota does have radiological health rules. We do have a chapter specific to T-norm and those regulations that must be followed for that material. Next. Like I say, we talked about this being a regulated material. As such, they need, these people that are running these operations, they need to have a specific radioactive material license. They need to be licensed by the state. So we've got people that are doing decontamination, removing scale from some of these pipes so they can be reused or recycled. The processing facilities, we kind of mentioned that already. And also the people that transport these materials, they need to have a license as well. And also as far as permanent disposal, they need a license for that. What's pictured here in the lower left, you'll see would be a filter press, where the material basically is squeezed together like an accordion kind of a thing, and it takes all the liquid out, and then when it re-expands, it drops the solids down at the bottom. And so the solids that come out, that's the regulated material, or the T-norm. That's a T-norm waste that they have to dispose of. On the right, it just shows it's in a closed system, pipe cleaning, as they say. They like to use the word cleaning in the industry, but it's actually decontaminating. Here they've got some reamers and things like that that go inside and ream out the scale that's inside the pipe. And it's an enclosed system. You can kind of see it coming off the top there. You've got a vent to where all the air is filtered through a HEP filter, and then the materials just collected in a 55-gallon drum outside the facility. So this helps reduce any airborne material. So it's helping protect the workers at the same time. We do have some facilities that use a wet method, but then it's kept wet, so it keeps it from becoming airborne. So as part of the licensing process, we do they need to have a radiation protection program that's set up to where they have everything spelled out as far as how they're going to protect their workers and their environment, how they're going to do perform their activities safely and protecting the environment. This also includes, we do regularly inspect these licensees. We do performance-based inspections. So it's kind of like, show me how you do this, and not just look at records. We look at records as part of it, but that's more like a kind of a verification. You can kind of ask the questions, how you doing this? How you doing this? And then if there's any question, you might need to look a little deeper into records in case you suspect any non-compliance, things like that. So we do radiation surveys of facilities on a regular basis as well, especially in the oil field, in the areas where the processing plants, things like that. We want to make sure that they're not contaminating the grounds, kind of catch it in earlier stages to where if we do see things, they can clean it up now and not let it get into a bigger problem in the long run. So next. There is also financial assurance that's required for the T-norm. Any facilities that are possessing T-norm ranges from a standard of $225,000 to $1.125 million. And it's all dependent on the amount of materials that they possess at any one time. So it's spelled out in the rules as far as how much material of certain elements, once they reach a certain threshold, it goes up to the next level and so forth. They do have the option to do a decommissioning funding plan where they can get a third party to do the cost estimates on what it would cost in today's dollars to do a full decommissioning of a site. and then we can set up the financial assurance accordingly. That's voluntarily up to the 1 1/8 million requirement, but once they possess enough material beyond the 1 1/8 million, then they're required to do that decommissioning funding plan. And those cost estimates that they come up with, they have to renew these every 3 years. So they'll have to provide that information to us every 3 years to make sure that we're keeping up with the current prices and that we're up with today's costs. Currently, we've got one landfill licensed in the state to accept T-norm waste. They can accept, I think it's up to 2,500 tons in a year, and with a maximum concentration of 50 picocuries per gram. That landfill is not currently accepting material. They haven't actually accepted material since they got their license. They're on hold, in a holding pattern right now. We're not sure where they're going to end up. We did have another landfill that had put in an application for to accept T-norm waste, but they backed out of that one. They decided to put that on hold themselves. There is one facility in the state that does the processing of material, and they do create a slurry. And then that material slurry, that T-norm waste and that slurry is injected down a Class 2 injection well. And that's KT Enterprises. I think I'm familiar with that. The landfill that we're talking about, that's Secure Energy. And they're currently on hold as far as accepting any material. Which KT? Yeah, it's up in that area. Yeah, and Secure is up by Williston, just north of the 13-mile corner. That's actually called the 13-mile landfill, so yeah, appropriately named. So, but yeah. So next. So when we talk about all this, in the end, we've heard this in a lot of the other talks, and we kind of alluded to it here as well, is that anytime you're thinking about transportation of any type of radioactive material, or even possessing material anywhere, communication is the key point. We've talked about things like the borehole project that went bad years ago. We've talked about some of the, even more recently, some of the things, communication continues to be the key as far as, being able to communicate as far ahead as you can. Having stakeholder and public input is key to any successful program. And I think that if we take anything back from, I think, a lot of these talks, that's where it's at. We need to be good communicators ourselves and include as many people that might be involved with it on the get-go and keep them up to date on things as things are going on. So that's it. Entertain any questions.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions from the committee? David.
Sorry, Sherry, that was my other alternate ego or personality. Basically, I'm saying the question is with everybody, there's a lot of interest moving towards small modular reactors. We're going to have more waste. We're going to have more sources. The federal government has shown an inability to really consistently police these things. How do you see the state programs evolving with that, if you had a crystal ball?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Glott, what I see with the radiation control program, we continue to educate ourselves on the new processes that are coming out, the new types of reactors. We have some outlets that provide like a nuclear news daily. We get information on what's going on in the nuclear world, that's more specific to different reactor types, things like that. And so that's our key at this point, is to continue to build our knowledge base on what the current events are. And that way, as we continue to grow and gather more information, we'll be more knowledgeable when it comes time to that point, to if and when we need to be the ones generating or creating regulations that might surround these types of reactors. There's already talk with, kind of a side note with the fusion reactors. Those are similar to what we have now. It's similar to a cyclotron, or a linear accelerator kind of a thing where you're speeding up materials. And, you know, where the states may be involved in actually, they'll be regulated by the states themselves. So we look at that point of it, and we continue to look at how that might transfer into the fission side of things, or the small modular reactors. So the more knowledge we have, the better we'll be prepared for it. We do have concerns over, you know, like the micro reactors that they're talking about. They're talking about things that have to be mobile. You know, how do we handle those? You know, because they may be moving in and out of our state. So we need to be prepared to address those issues as well. You know, to continue to make sure that you know, we're keeping the citizens safe and the environment safe. You know, I think we have a general concept already on how waste can be stored safely. You know, you start with the T-norm waste side of things. It's radioactive waste. You know, similar concepts can be applied when you're looking at disposal of those materials. It's just you need to have that increased scientific information. Like the geological side of things. You know, having more information on that, coming together as a group and working with other programs is going to be key to this as well. This isn't a silo situation here. You know, we need to be working with other programs to where we have the information that we need to make an educated decision. You know, we have the science to make, you know, educated decisions. So that's where I see it.
Continue, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess going along with that, you know, I just don't see the small modular reactors being isolated into themselves. The ripple effect is going to go throughout state government and local governments, and being in a position to starting from the beginning with mining of uranium in the state. I could see that being changed. I know Ed and his group have put together rules to look at that. Never really been used, but I could see that changing. And so although this committee is a high-level nuclear waste committee, I think you broaden that vision a little bit to look at all radioactive sources from cradle to grave. And I think that's the challenge that will be for North Dakota moving forward, is do we have the infrastructure there to deal with that? And I think it would move pretty quickly. So that's just more of a comment.
Thank you. Any further questions for David? Seeing none, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now moving on to the most important part of the program, comments by me. As you guys know, we talked about this previously. I'm also chairing the Advanced Nuclear Energy Committee, and I wanted to give an update related to that as we go forward, and how that will kind of impact or affect how this council operates. The areas of interest that we are going to be working on with presentations are, it's going to cover cost, technology, fuel source, permitting and regulation, both at the federal and the state level, waste storage, ownership and liability, and then other experiences. We've got the presentation by the Public Service Commission out of Georgia that's going to be presenting at our next meeting. So those are the areas that we've identified so far. We've retained or hired a private company called Nucleon that will be doing the official study work. And they've got a schedule of 4 different meetings set up to present on the topics according to the study terms. And I can give those dates, and I will have them follow up with an email once they're actually confirmed. These are tentative, but December 15th, March 24th, June 16th, and August 11th. They're going to give 4 different updates, and depending based on their contract with us. That'll include some general siting information, and Megan Gordon, who's the Ledge Council person that works with me on this, we had a call yesterday, and that will be discussed probably in our December meeting a little bit. And the kind of the initial stages that they're going to look at is what are the must-haves for a nuclear facility as far as a location? What are really would like to have and what's a no-go, can't do it. And with that, they think that they can identify some general areas of the state where they potentially would be located based on, I'm going to call it fact-based analysis. One of the key criteria for any siting is going to be community engagement, involvement, and acceptance. So that's part and parcel of as this starts to get narrowed down, that'll be part of the discussion as we move forward. I think that based upon the work that we're doing within that committee, I don't anticipate that this committee will need to meet probably until a year from now or sometime next fall. You guys are welcome to either attend in person or online. It'll be online if you want to stay informed about what's going on with that other committee. Their role is more expansive than what I would consider this committee's role is. It's made up of 17 members. I think it's 12 legislators, 3 agency people, and then 2 industry people. So we're going to, I think when we look at the energy picture for the state of North Dakota, and this is my own opinion based on the facts as I've seen and heard them, we're experiencing a tremendous increase in demand, driven by, I'm going to call it 3 different areas: value-added energy projects, value-added ag projects, and data centers. And as we add those components, I would also argue that the degree of reliability those different industries are looking for is higher than what exists in the current market. When I say reliable, I'm talking base load. And the 3 sources of base load that are feasible in any is natural gas, coal, and nuclear. We're not going to see any more hydro, but the renewables are going to be wind and solar. But as we start adding that generation, I think that we're going to see an increased interest in that higher level of reliable baseload energy compared to where we're at right now in the market. I also tend to feel like the easy renewable projects have been done. As we add more renewable, they're going to cost more and they're going to be more expensive to do. And there's going to be more landowner pushback on it because, like I said, the easy part has already happened. So there's going to be more difficulty as we consider adding renewable, which is going to push back into the interest in our baseload aspects of it. Of those 3 components, the fastest one to bring online is going to be natural gas. Additional capacity is natural gas. I was just at a ribbon cutting up west of Williston for the Bison plant, or the Pioneer plant. That's about a 580 megawatt generation station. Basin Electric is adding almost a 1,500 megawatt generation station northeast of Williston, and that'll be it's called the Bison plant. That will be the largest power generation plant in the state when that's completed. And that's anticipated to be around 2029, 2030 coming online. How many billion? 1.3 billion, Reese, do you remember?
1.3 billion sounds about right.
The Pioneer plant was $800 million investment. When we look at coal, right now, in order to capture the carbon off of coal, it's about a 30% parasitic load. They're working on some things with that, but that's an expensive parasitic load. You know, when you basically give up 30% in order to capture the carbon off of it. But that's what what the marketplace is looking for is a carbon limited, restricted, or free energy source. That's why natural gas has so appeal, because it has a much lower carbon footprint than coal does. Coal captured and they can get there, they can do it, but it takes a lot of capital investment. I think the opportunity for a next generation coal plant in our state is very real, but it will contain a carbon capture component to move forward with that. So that leaves the third one, which is nuclear. So when I stage that timeline to build these, natural gas is more quick, immediate. We have a natural gas pipeline that's going to get built from Waterford City all the way over to Fargo area. That's going to be providing opportunities for additional generation along that path. Coal, like I said, is going to take a little bit longer period of time because the capital requirements there are higher, and the return is less unless they can get that parasitic load figured out. So then that's the third aspect of it is nuclear. The timeline for nuclear, at least right now, under these circumstances, is even longer than that. So there is time for our state to look at this. When we look at it, right now, the small modular reactors are extremely expensive. So when you compare them to both coal and natural gas, they're not in the cost benefit ballpark right now. When we talk to the power providers in our state, if they were to look at a nuclear plant, they don't want to be model number one. They would like to be way down the road as far as that goes. So, so this is a very early look at what the options are, and the study that's being done the final report will be at the August meeting, and then we'll probably have another meeting of that committee that will come forward if we make any decisions regarding proposed legislation. But I wanted to keep this committee completely informed on what's going on with that, and make sure that you're invited to take in as much as you would like to related to the, listening in. So, so with that, like meeting topics, I kind of covered where we would be at with the advanced nuclear. Any meetings from here, at least right now, unless something else comes up, I wouldn't anticipate till probably next fall. There's no sense in duplicating these. They're available online to watch if you want to. The material presented at that would be what would be presented here, but probably in a broader scale than what we would normally present, because our focus is primarily on the waste aspect here. David.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate all of that. I will say a couple of things. I think it's going to move faster than what we think. The large companies that are coming to us aren't looking to the utilities. They're going to build their own plants. And they've talked about that. And we've talked a little bit about what will that look like. And they said everything's on the table. And, there obviously timing is an issue with nuclear. I do think that's going to be shortened up because of the demand for moving quicker than waiting 10 years for a nuclear power plant to go through the NRC. I think that's going to move faster. So I think you're right, we have plenty of time, but I do think they're looking out of the box. The companies we've talked to, they mentioned numbers like $3 to $5 billion just for energy generation. They don't bat an eye at it. Yeah. It's just, that's decimal dust because the things they're looking at are so far beyond that. So I think there'll be some interesting times for your committee that you're on, and plus this one as well. I would say that, I'll kick myself for this. I did see that legislation come through. We probably should have been a part of that committee, just with our knowledge and experience of radioactive materials, radioactive facilities. And so we'll participate kind of on the side as much as possible, because I do think there is things that we need to be aware of, and we can probably provide some insight to the committee as needed. So.
I think it originally started as a 9-member committee, and it expanded to 17.
Far be it for me to invite myself to a party, but I think, I think we can still get the information and be aware of what's going on and how that would impact us.
The expansion, which I thought was somewhat surprised at, was the interest by legislators. They wanted to serve on it. That was interesting. By the way, you are invited to the party. So You're more than welcome to take
I'm
it.
never invited to a party, so I don't know if I want to show up now.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know what's up. No,
Um,
I appreciate that
Yeah.
because
And
I do think
I have
it's-
heard that, the timeline is shorter than what they previously talked 10 to 15 years. And when he talked about being built by the industry, they're generally, there's two terms that are used: behind the meter and off grid actually is the other one. By behind the meter, that's like a data center having their very own power source. And the challenge that they have, and this is one that is, generally speaking, when they build their own power, they want to oversize it, build more capacity than they need right now. And then if they oversize it, they also then want to be able to sell their excess. And once they want to be able to access the grid to sell their excess, then they become a utility and then they're regulated. And so there's a little bit of a push and pull related to that, how they do that. The other thing is these data centers want an extremely high level of reliability. They call it 5 nines of reliability. That's 99.999% reliability. So ultimately, they also potentially want to be access to the grid because they cannot shut down. The Ellendale plant has 63 megawatt diesel generators on site, if I remember right.
64, and that's a headache for us. So.
Yeah. And they have, what is it, about 800 and 900,000 gallons of diesel fuel.
That's another headache for us.
And that diesel is enough to run it for 2 days. Their battery backup, I think will run it for like 11 minutes or something like that. And that only is their time to get those generators started. That's the level of reliability. They got battery, then diesel, and then to get their power back online. Well, I mentioned that natural gas pipeline. There is a spur that they plan on running from south of Jamestown to Ellendale to help provide additional power in there. So any questions or other comments from the committee? Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to briefly comment on the water energy nexus. So last week I was at an interstate conference in Atlanta with some of my counterparts from various other states, and data centers was the main theme. The data center demand in all the other states around us is very strong as well. Like our neighbors in Minnesota have 17 data centers in their queue, but at the same time they are shedding their baseload and adding more demand to the grid. And of course, the grid's not an island. We're in the same grid, and it will have consequences for North Dakota. Some of those being that you add demand and you reduce the supply. Now the costs go up. Some of the states were commenting they're starting to see their utility costs increase. Therefore, the cost to pump the water and treat the water increase. Of course, data centers also use a lot of water. So all these costs are starting to increase in these other states. And I think we have a unique opportunity here in North Dakota to play a role in expanding baseload and helping to be a solution, but it's going to come pretty quick.
Yeah. When we look at that, the ability to build new generation is limited. Minnesota, their goal is carbon free. So they got to do it with wind and solar or nuclear. So, I mean, it's when they want to say the data centers want to move extremely fast, they do, but they have that limitation on where they're going to get their power. And I would argue that North Dakota is positioned to provide it at a faster level than just about anybody else right now, with Wyoming being very close. So, Merrick, did you have anything you want to add?
Turn this on.
Yep.
So I know that part of the things that they were looking on when they were picking the company that's going to do the study, right, for the Advanced Nuclear Energy Committee, one of it was identifying legislation in the Century Code that might be counterproductive. Are you aware of anything, any challenges? So this is going to come out probably throughout the study, right?
Yeah, and I believe that probably is going to be presented in either the March or June meeting.
March, okay,
when
so that's when they should be, okay.
And they told us yesterday they may consider contracting that with Excel Services, which is one of the other had submitted an application or proposal. They were the second place one in our, so, and they have probably a little better knowledge about the regulatory side. They said so they may be contracting with them to provide some of that support or some of that information.
So that's when we would know.
Yep.
They would bring that up. Okay. And the other thing is, you know, it was mentioned that one of the presenters said they were talking about Holtec backing out of the deal in for interim high-level waste storage in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the press release on that, you know, when they were talking about it, and basically they were mentioning that there is about 15 to 20 states that had just recently relaxed their legislation, you know, so they're going to be looking into going somewhere else. And I'm just, yeah, I wanted to kind of reiterate that we need to stay vigilant on this side too, because one thing is bringing more energy into the state. I totally understand that, but we don't want to open ourselves up with that on that line, you know.
As far as storage.
As far as storage,
yeah.
As far as getting stuff from somebody else, you know, from somewhere else. So it's very important that we kind of stay informed, which I believe is your job, Mr. Chairman, chairing both committees on the legal side of things.
Yeah. Well, right now, my understanding is all of the waste that's generated, with the exception of the Department of Defense, is stored on location wherever it's generated in those casks. And nobody has permitted the deep geological storage at this point.
Not yet, but they are looking. Holtec is looking for sure. They have a lot of money for that, you know.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Any questions from anybody online? Seeing none, anything from anybody else? Okay, once we confirm these dates, we will get those out to the committee as far as the advanced nuclear. The next one is locked in on December 15th. That's a Monday at 10 a.m. It'll be here at the Capitol. So otherwise, if there's nothing else, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.